Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. My name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the chair of the committee. We are joined by Council Members Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Philippe Cunningham, and Councilmember Lene Palmisano. And as such, we are a quorum of this committee and therefore can conduct the official business that is before us today. So our first item here is to adopt the agenda. In our agenda today, we have 3 items. Item number 1 is receiving and filing public comments from the community regarding public safety issues. Item number 2 is to receive and file a report on data related to the Minneapolis Police Department traffic enforcement. And item number 3 is a receive and file of a presentation from the Minneapolis Police Department on public safety cameras. Are there any questions on the agenda? With none, we shall move to adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we will begin by taking public comment from the community. And so I have a list here of folks who have signed up to come and share their public comment with us. So we will start. I'll name off the first 3 people so that we can get folks ready. The first person is James Works, and then we have Pete Gamades, and then we have Jennifer Gerlichen. And so if you can please just use 3 minutes to testify to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak to the council. So Mr. James Works, if you would like to please come up and share your thoughts.
Hello, my name is Mr. Works. Over the past 4 years, I've been harassed by 3rd Precinct Police. I work food delivery, late night Uber Eats, Grubhub. They stop me for no apparent reason. And then when I go to the precinct to complain, I get charged with trespassing by the same cop that I am complaining about. Upon discovery, on their body camera, on there, one officer is saying, oh, he's a piece of S. You know, I'm not going to cuss, but he's this. Then you have the other officer who's harassing me saying, hey, he's driving this kind of car now. So it's an ongoing thing to where I had to install front and rear dash cams on my vehicle just so that I'm safe, okay? That doesn't help. They know my car, they know my plate, they pull me over. If I make a change lanes, they'll change lanes. I'll go back to this one, they do that, and they don't stop me, so I stop. I spoke to Lieutenant Lund. I spoke to almost everybody I could. Now their thing is, right now they're driving undercover cars, mostly the trucks and stuff like that. I literally called 911. The person told me, following you is not a crime. So I said, okay, fine. The next one I see, I'm gonna follow them. Don't you know that they called backup, a squad car, to make sure I'm not telling them so closely, things like that. I'm just trying to make an honest living. I'm not doing anything. I filed complaints through upstairs, you know, the complaint, everything like that. I did all of that, but all of this has not stopped. I'm just a regular citizen trying to do work. When I have my daughter in my car, they're still harassing me. When she's not in my car, that's when I go follow them and say, hey, at nighttime, they'll shine their bright light in my face to where I will literally follow them and say, hey, what is your name and badge number? And then they'll try to take off from me, in which that was another 911 call. All these stuff is documented, but this harassment will not stop. And I feel like if it does not stop, something's gonna happen to where this is on Channel 5 News saying either an undercover officer was hurt by a civilian because he didn't know he was an undercover cop, and I'm thinking they're trying to rob me because I'm working. I spoke to the chief earlier today and other organizations. All I'm asking is that this harassment stop. I'm not breaking any laws. But even though I'm not breaking any laws, I'm getting tagged with multiple things that's on my record when I'm not doing anything. Like I said, trespassing at a police station for complaining. Every time I go to there and try to complain, oh, you know the drill. Here, you want us to give you the sheet? And that's it. They usher me off. I spoke to Sergeant Collins. He told me Lieutenant Lund is no longer there. I spoke to him. Oh, I'll get back to you. Haven't heard from him. So basically all this, when a citizen is just minding their own business, all of a sudden I get harassed. But I can see plenty of other cars doing bad things and they don't stop them. Now, I don't know if it's because my car is a nice car or whatever, but at the same point in time, just to wrap this up, the officer, Officer Simonson, okay, he stopped me, he just boom, pulled up behind. I'm not doing nothing. Oh, you made a weird turn. That's why I stopped you. Okay, we argued. I left. 30 days later, he stopped me again and said, "Oh, your plates don't match your vehicle." I'm like, "Wait a minute, dude. I got a big old sign in the back of my window that says, you know, the temporary tag, and this is the same car that you stopped 30 days ago. You didn't say nothing about my tags then." Then he's like, "Oh, well, you can't have those plates." I said, "I talked to DMV, okay? If you have a problem with that, talk to them." I was stopped there for about an hour or so, just so they can let me go, just for the heck of it. And like I said, this is a constant thing. I go to work today, guess what's gonna happen? They follow me. And every time they follow me, I have to call 911, say I'm a black man in fear of my life. I wanna make it home to my daughter, but this is a constant issue. And I wish it would stop. It was fun at first, but now the novelty wore off. Let them go back to doing what they're supposed to be doing and just leave me alone. That's all I'm asking for. Because like I said, what's gonna happen is I'm gonna start protecting myself. I have a right to protect myself, and somebody's gonna get hurt. I'm a US veteran. They mock me as a veteran. I have that on video. They say, the Army must be real proud of you when we're in an argument and stuff like that. First of all, why are you arguing with me, causing a scene, and then say, I'm gonna arrest you for disorderly conduct when I'm talking the same way that you're talking? These are officers of the 3rd Precinct. I have no other problem with other precincts. It's just the 3rd Precinct. I can go to St. Paul, wherever. They followed me from Minneapolis to University Avenue, from University Avenue all the way to Richfield. So what we say, okay, well, since they follow us, we're gonna give them a show. This is when all the Christmas lights was up. So we took them, we just drove by the Christmas lights, and then when we got to Richfield, we knew what they was doing. As soon as we turned, we started pointing and laughing because there they was. They was, you know, in a little motor thing or whatever like that. Like I said, I'm just one person, okay? I'm a military brat, military veteran, and everything. Most people like me, they don't know how to deal with the situation. I believe in not holding court out in the street, but taking it to their bosses. After I take it to their bosses and nothing is done, then at that point, I feel like, okay, it's now back in my hands to do whatever I need to do to stay safe. If they're not gonna protect me, if you guys aren't gonna protect me, then I have no other recourses but to protect myself. And these undercover cops who follow me, if they get hurt because they don't identify themselves, I even give them chances, and so I will pull over to let them pull over to talk to me. They do nothing. So if this keeps going up, I'm gonna see this as a threat. And if that's the threat, however you guys wanna take it, I have a right to protect myself, like I said before. All I'm asking for this stuff is to stop, period. That's it.
Thank you. And you did note that the chief is here, and so I'm sure he'll have his staff connect with you. We also have the mayor's office represented by Ms. Jen White here, who can also try to connect with you. And I've taken down notes here and reached out to a couple of departments as you were speaking. So thank you for being here. Mr. Pete Gamades, followed by Jennifer Gerlich.
Hello, Chair Cano and the fellow members of the committee. I'm Pete Gamades, and I am part of the Racial Justice Network. And we're here today to demand a moratorium on police stops for equipment violations due to the large disparities that occur. Based on publicly available data that's on MPD's site, so thank you, Chief, for making that data available. If you are black, you are 6 times more likely to be pulled over for an equipment violation. And then once you're pulled over, you're 3 times more likely to be searched as a result of that stop if you are black. Now, you might expect if this strategy works and it yields greater results, we would see that in the data as well. And the data shows that the arrest rates are not that materially different between black and white drivers. And so it doesn't appear that it's creating better results. in relation to these stats, to people in this room, it's more than stats. It's their lived experiences. It's something that they have to face throughout their life because of the color of their skin. And so as a result, we've invited people from the community to share their experiences and the impact that this has had on their life. And you'll hear from more. James was one of them, and you'll hear from more today. Also later today on the agenda, you'll hear from MPD, and there's a couple approaches that they could take with their presentation. One, they could acknowledge the trauma that this inflicts on communities, this type of policing, how it erodes trust between the community and the police, and hopefully suggest alternatives. Or they could take the approach of using their time to justify this type of policing, potentially even use fear of crime to sway your opinions and not produce any alternatives. And I hope they choose the former, because the fear is kind of what we hear in national politics. Like if you don't build this wall, we will be overrun by criminals in this country. Similarly, if we don't continue this type of policing, we may have a crime wave in the city of Minneapolis. And so I hope the chief and the mayor and MPD don't take that approach today. What I would like to end with is a quote from Stacey Abrams from her speech last night after the State of the Union address. "We fought Jim Crow with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, yet we continue to confront racism from our past and in our present, which is why we must hold everyone from the highest offices to our own families accountable for racist words and deeds, and call racism what it is, wrong."
Thank you. Ms. Jennifer Gerlich, and then Ms. Marion Beard-Goss, followed by Mr. Pastor John Steger.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Gilreath, and I've been living in South Minneapolis as a homeowner for over 16 years in the Phillips neighborhood, right off of Lake Street and the Chicago area. So I'm very familiar with the police over there and have witnessed many different interactions they've had with people in our neighborhood. Most of them, the majority of them, have not been good interactions. My first time that I had an interaction with the police was at a gas station where I was pumping gas, and all of a sudden a bunch of cops came and surrounded my car and the car next to me because there were youth in that car, and they had their guns out and were going after those youth. It turns out they had done nothing wrong. That was my first interaction when I was a student at the U. As far as the racial profiling, and the reason why we're asking for a stop on the equipment violations is I do have personal experience with that. My partner is African American, and we were driving the same car within our neighborhood, and we had a tail light out, and we had a mechanic who was going to fix it for us but couldn't do it right away. And I didn't get pulled over by the police once. He did over 3 times. And we're driving the same car. It's just got a tail light out. And he has more stories. And unfortunately, he could not be here today, but he could tell you. He has more stories. His mother, the police came and towed her car one day because apparently someone had driven her car and got into a car accident with it. We went out and we're telling the police, hey, no, that was not her. Please don't tow her car. She's on a limited, budget income. She cannot afford this. Please don't do that. Let us sort it out. Give us time. Nope, towed the car. And she had done nothing wrong. And that's not an equipment violation, but that's just another example. And as Pete had said, the stats speak for themselves. We also put out a survey. We had over 100 responses. We called and talked to different people. We've emailed with different people, and we've heard repeatedly over and over similar of what James has told you today, similar what other people will tell you today, that they're pulled over for no real reason for these equipment violations, that when they're pulled over, there's not guns on them, there's not drugs on them, and that's what the police are going to tell you as to why they do this. And I also want to point out that it's interesting that in the 2003 federal mediation agreement that the city had, the Minneapolis police had with the community, it was even noted in that mediation agreement in 2003 that racial profiling was a problem then, and the police were supposed to work on it and fix it. Well, years later, what is it, 16 years later, and we still have the same problem going on. It has not changed. It's time to change. Something needs to be done, and that's why we're asking you, because that is your committee, oversight of police policies and services. You have the power to influence. You have the power to make change, to do something. That's why people voted you in here. If you ran on a platform to change things with the police, please use that today. That's what we are asking you to do. And this is one step, just one step in many other steps that need to occur with the Minneapolis Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Marion Beard-Goss, followed by Pastor John Steger, and then Camille Gage.
Good morning. I guess you could say I'm celebrating 50 years in your town. I'm not from here. I have a very extensive driving record, but I kind of don't get it in a sense. I have a lot of violations for no license plate light, but then they should have gave me a ticket for the duct tape on my window maybe, but they didn't. My husband got a DWI in my car. I got pulled over more for being him than I did for being me. He's 6'5", I'm 5'4". I don't sit that high, but I got pulled over a lot. Oh, we thought you were Tracy. We thought you were Tracy. But once I got a ticket for speeding, and I got a lot of tickets for speeding. But I kind of want to know if y'all can help me with this ticket. Because I live in the state of Minnesota, and I got a ticket in 1998 in Wisconsin that I had to pay in the state of Minnesota to drive here. And now I got it back, and they're telling me that I didn't pay it. So can y'all tell me who I'm supposed to call and ask, did I really pay this ticket? Because I know I did, and I don't have a receipt from 1998, and I'm really not going to pay it again. And they pulled my husband over and woke him up and gave him a seatbelt ticket when we were stopped. And I thought, wow. And he was pissed. So it's kind of like, can y'all tell me how I can get this fixed? Because I'm valid today in the state of Minnesota, and I wouldn't be if I didn't pay this ticket. So who do I need to call?
What we can do is I can talk to you after the committee meeting has wrapped up, or if you want to leave your information for either the chief.
I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pastor John Steger and Camille Gage is after that, followed by Lisa Clemens after that.
Hi, how you guys doing today? It's Pastor John with Grace in the City Church. On a different note, on a different issue, which is not an issue, I just want to talk about the relationship that we do have with the Minneapolis Police Department. We work in collaboration with them each and every day as Sergeant Grant Snyder offices at our church at Grace in the City. We have a ministry that we have that's open 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, that feeds every single person and gives them drink every single day for free. So I want to tell you that the work that's being done between the collaboration work that's being done with the police department and the community and public safety is awesome from our standpoint. I don't really know about these other issues, which I'm sure are real, and I get it, and I hear it, and I see some of it in the city. But at the same time, I also see a huge care from the chief's office and the mayor's office and the police department themselves as it was put into action last week, as we had the sheriff going out with us and the MPD going out with us and taking people provisions from all over the city. And also we had people that were picked up and brought to the hospital because of danger being out in the cold. So I see a huge care for the people in the city, and I see this work being done together. So I don't want it to just, I don't want everything to be negative. I want there to be positive, and that's what I'm looking for, is positive. And I look to what can I get positive out of an issue, and what can we do to help. And what we're doing is we're bringing people into a place 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, to give them food, to get them out of the cold, to help them, to get them off the streets. And I believe that's public safety. I mean, really digging in and trying to stop this homelessness that we deal with. That's what we deal with, homeless and vulnerable people, every single day of the week. And we see people that are on drugs, and we see drugs being a huge issue, and we see that people, once they find that trust in you, they'll start to listen to you, and they'll eventually want to get off the street, and we can put them in the treatment and get them off the street, help them with housing, help them with employment. We have quite a few people that we partner with YouthLink and Platinum Staffing and St. Vincent de Paul. So I mean, there's so many things that are going on that are positive. I just wanted to bring that up to you guys so you know that from a public safety standpoint, we're actually reaching and doing a lot of work in the city with the Sheriff's Department, with the Police Department, especially with Chief Rondo and the Mayor and Sergeant Snyder. And it's making an impact. I mean, people are coming in and people are actually starting to change. People are going into treatment. People are getting off the street, and it's nice to see. So I just wanted to let you guys know that from that standpoint, there's a lot of positive going on in the facility that we have, and we're there, and you could send people there every single day of the week. People will get fed. That's a big deal. So thank you. I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate the work that Sergeant Snyder's doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Camille Gage, followed by Lisa Clemens, and then Gwen Gunter.
Hi, I'm Camille Gage, and I was asked to come and speak today on the issue of homelessness and the partnerships that we've had with the police. And I want to also say I stand in solidarity with the people that are here. I didn't realize that this was happening, but I understand the problem and support what they're saying as well. That said, as you know, I've worked at the Franklin Hiawatha encampment and now somewhat involved with the Navigation Center. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood just the value that the police have brought to the process. It's a really difficult thing dealing with people that are very vulnerable, who are homeless, have addiction issues, and there's often violence and a lot of conflict. And the officers that we worked with in the encampment and continue to work with were really good at de-escalation, at just meeting people where they were, believe it or not. I mean, Sergeant Snyder is pretty amazing in that way. And so I just am here to speak to the positive, that there are some good things happening with the police in our community. And clearly, we would not have been successful moving the encampment to the Navigation Center without the involvement of the Minneapolis police. It just wouldn't have happened. The relationships that a few of the officers built with the homeless people in the weeks leading up to that time were invaluable. So that's what I'm here to speak to, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Lisa Clemens, followed by Gwen Gunter, and then Keith McCarron.
So Gwen Gunter couldn't make it, but she sent an email for me to read, so I'll read that on her time.
Okay.
I'm having a problem with people saying that the police department's putting the fear of crime in people's head. There is a fear. We just had a bus driver shot yesterday in front of a child. We just had a Somali male sitting in his car, shot in his head, that took his eye out. Last year alone, we had 241 shot, 27 dead. So there is a fear of crime. And we don't ever call a moratorium on crime in this room. The community don't come out, these same faces, come out for everything to attack the police. But we don't ever come out and have the council hold a meeting on the gun violence in our community. Ask yourself why that's going on. What's the real end game here? I know most of you ran on police reform. I don't have a problem with that, because the police do need to be reformed. But what I have a problem with is when they are trying to do things right, you take every tool away from them. You took lurking. That led to no enforcement on loitering. So what do we have in North Minneapolis, West Broadway? They hang out, they shoot dice, they sell stolen goods, drugs, cuss in front of our kids, argue in the parking lots that turn into fights and then shots fired. When do we address those things? Traffic law enforcement. They are recovering guns, and I thank God that they are. I don't know where we're going with this, but for me, this is a safety issue. And if you want to call a moratorium, then you have to eat what comes behind that. And I'm saying that from my heart. If I'm driving behind a car with no brake lights, I don't want to be that car. If they got one light out, tail lights out, I don't want to be that car. If they have no headlights, I don't want to be in front of them. And if they're shooting out of their windows, I don't even want to be on the street that they're on. And I say this from my heart. Y'all know I come and I only challenge you on those type of safety issues in our community. They love to come and speak on behalf of Black people, driving white Black. I would like, if you're going to have a moratorium, have it include, if the cops give them fix-it tickets. And then just like every other pot of money that you find, help them fix that. Because a lot of it is, I can't afford to fix it. A lot of it is that. But when I looked at the stats, they're not even getting tickets for that. They're getting advised. But I don't want them to get stopped again, so let's come up with a pot of money to help them fix it. And then they bring it right to the precinct, show that it's been fixed, and we're done with that. I'm just asking you to find out what your end game is, because it's really not helping us in our community. And then here's Gwen's. She said, my name is Gwen Gunter. She lives at 3350 Xerxes Avenue North. I am a retired lieutenant from MPD. I have lived in Minneapolis for 30 years. First, I want to congratulate the council for talking about the disproportionate number of brown-skinned people being stopped. I have been one of those brown-skinned people many times. However, I feel like doing away with traffic stops is an overreach. Traffic stops lead to major intel and arrest. When I was on the job, 2 of my officers pulled over a truck because of a broken tail light. There were 2 60-year-old men and 1 18-year-old female. The officers were concerned because the men were not related to the female and things just didn't seem right. They separated the female from the men and were able to get her mother's phone number, and they called her. The mother told them that there was a federal warrant out for one of the men for human trafficking and gave them the number to the federal probation officer. This man had been trafficking women and girls in 4 states. He started trafficking this young woman when she was 14. His probation forbid him from contacting or communicating with her. They were out recruiting young girls that day. The man was convicted of felony trafficking and sentenced to 15 years. The mother was able to get her daughter back and into drug rehabilitation. Those officers saved countless girls from being trafficked, all due to their traffic stop for an equipment violation. Please keep talking about the problem and ways to address it, but a blanket policy is not leadership, it's a lack of leadership. Have the difficult conversations and keep having them. But traffic stops are essential to public safety, and was to the young lady that night. And I'll leave you with this. Many of our serial killers were captured for what? A traffic violation or an equipment violation. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Clemens. We have Keith McCarron up next, followed by Delina Walker.
Hi, Keith McCarron, and as many of you know, I've worked at MECC for 16 years, so I get a little insight into what happens. The thing that I want to address is, number one is the traffic stops. If you look at the dashboard itself, the dashboard tells the true story of what the results are. A spectacular story, a great human result from a traffic stop where human trafficking is stopped, that's fantastic. But if that happens and takes place once out of 1,000 stops, you've now created 999 traumatic events for other people and taken one event for a good result. We used to call it fishing expeditions. Every police officer down here knows this term, fishing expeditions. You cast out the lure and see what you can catch. And that's not the reason for the traffic stop. It's supposed to be equipment violation. And it's just an excuse to pull somebody over and be able to run them. And we don't need that in our community. If you've got a traffic stop that starts to become escalated, now you got to pull more and more squads off of calls and bring them over to backup. And we've seen the kind of results that this has occurred in, traumatic results throughout the whole country with traffic stops, where events started out with traffic stops and ended up with deaths. And that happened with Philando Castile just across the border. We don't want that. We've been lucky so far. We had 3 people shot in Minneapolis last year by the police. We don't need this to happen over a traffic equipment violation. My big concern is that 2003 federal mediation. I know what happened on that, and they would do a TLE, traffic law enforcement stop, and they'd change the nature code so that they'd get around the stats. So they'd change it to a suspicious vehicle, suspicious person, a disturbance, whatever. So they didn't have to track the race of the person that they were stopping. That's why nothing has changed, is because you can juke stats any way you want to juke them. You make them point out what you want them to point out. And I think that Chief Rondo has done an absolutely fantastic job with the dashboard of presenting transparency with the Minneapolis Police Department, and I appreciate that. I think it's great, and I wish more people knew about it and looked into it and drilled down into the information. The information's very clear. Once you start to look, you see it's not an efficient means of policing. And there's much better things that we can be doing to create an uplifting experience in our community rather than causing more harassment, fear, and economic problems. So, thank you.
Thank you. We have Ms. Selena or Delina Walker, followed by Stephanie Stewart.
Hi. Good morning. Can you hear me?
If you can come closer to the mic.
That right? Oh, I can hear me now. Okay, so I'm here to share my story of being driving while melanated. And I had an experience where I got pulled over, and so the officer jumped out of the car, and I asked him what I was being pulled over for, and so I didn't realize that they were specialists when it comes to vehicles. So I was driving an Intrepid at that time, and he was telling me there was I needed a light up under my license plate. And so I was like, my vehicle doesn't come with that. And so I'm like, no, it doesn't come with that. So he was just adamant of telling me that I needed this light. And I'm like, no, that doesn't come with that. So I said, well, if that's the reason why I'm being pulled over and my vehicle does not come with this light, it doesn't, why am I still having this conversation with him? So he then gets irritated, and then he puts his hands on his pistol. And so I'm just like, I get uncomfortable myself. And so I immediately pick up my phone and I call 911, because now I feel like there is a miscommunication going on here, because there is no reason for you to put your hand on your pistol when I'm asking, why am I still sitting here being pulled over or just being in this situation right now. And so I caught 911 on the phone. He had to send out another officer at the scene over in North Minneapolis, and because the officer was not letting me go, he didn't give me a ticket. He still didn't answer the question, why am I still sitting here? And so I'm on the phone with 911 at this time, and I'm telling them that I don't even understand what's going on at this point. You know, my vehicle doesn't come with a light underneath its license plates, and the officer seems very irritated, and he had placed his hand on his gun, and he went to his vehicle. So now I'm not sure what's going on at this point. I don't feel safe because he's very rude, and so the dispatcher just told me to remain calm and just wait, and she's going to get in contact with the officer. And so she had dispatched someone. I'm not sure who it was, but there was another vehicle that did show up. Now, when that vehicle showed up, did I feel safe? No, I didn't, because it seems like he wasn't there for me. He was there to assist the officer. So I'm just like, okay, now what am I going to do here? So I'm still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, and she's like, well, did the other vehicle show up? Yeah, it's here, but he's, tending to the other officer. Again, I don't understand why am I still sitting here and my vehicle doesn't come with the light. And so the officer comes out of the car, he comes to my vehicle, and he tells me, the other officer that shows up with him also tells me that there is a light that goes there. And so now I feel like I'm going back and forth with two officers. And so I'm just like, okay, here we go. I'm telling the dispatcher on the phone, no, they're telling me that there's a light, and I feel very uncomfortable, and I'm ready to leave at this point. And so the officer, she's just like, just follow what the officers are telling you to do. And it's like, well, they're not telling me to do anything. They're just complaining. They're complaining to me about my light that I know that don't come with this vehicle. So eventually, the whole thing came to a halt. I got a ticket for speeding. Imagine that. I got a ticket for speeding when it was about the light on my vehicle. So I'm like, all right, well, Lisa, all right, we're done with this conversation. Everything is done. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to talk about the ticket and why it's even there due to the officer's hostilities and, his energy that he had displayed with his pistol on his hand. So if I don't feel comfortable with speaking with the officers in my community or just, being able to educate them on certain vehicles that, I feel like they're useless, they're pointless, there's no reason for them to be there because they already come under their own assumptions on how they're going to delegate the situation. And that's whether they're right or wrong. And most of the time they're in the wrong, so with my case, it was very wrong. I had to pay a $137 ticket to keep my license due to another individual's personal feelings on my community. And that's wrong. And so I just feel as though that the culture of the police needs to change. It's been the same and it's been ongoing for too many years, and it has to change. And I'm sick and tired of seeing people beg and ask you guys for the same thing over and over and over again, and you do nothing. Nothing. Why we suffer. And now I'm, at this point, believing it's a game to you guys. It's a joke. You don't take our lives serious. And, culture has proven it. You don't take us serious at all. We're human just like anybody else. Truth be told, I'm back myself because I don't want to go there with you today. But I am tired of the culture of the police department in all states in the United States of America. And they stand for that culture to this day. And nothing has changed. So what are you going to do about it? Because we protect ourselves all the time. What are you going to do about it? Do something. Don't just look at me. Do something. Our community needs you. We've asked from the early 1900s to 2000. Here we are in the new millennium, and we're still asking. What are you going to do something? How many people's got to die? What are you going to do something? You get paid to do nothing. Just like the officers that you put on our streets to harass us, to treat us terribly like this isn't in our community. And it is. So what are you going to do? Do something. And do it now. Yes.
Thank you. We have Stephanie Stewart up next, followed by Nakima Levy Armstrong, and then Lester Collins.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Stewart, and I was asked to come here and speak on behalf of the Minneapolis Police Department and my working relationship with them. I would also like to just bring a little bit of positive light to the situation here. I wasn't quite aware of the situation that I was under. However, I do have a very good working relationship with them and can bring a little bit of the opposite side of the story to this. I did work the Franklin-Hiawatha encampment since spring. I'm also out on the streets as an advocate and an outreach worker pretty much 24 hours a day, so I rely heavily on the Minneapolis Police Department for protection. I have seen their interaction with the homeless individuals at the encampment, and all I can really say is that the working relationship that I have seen them build with a lot of the citizens here has been amazing. I have also seen them, as Camille said, be excellent at de-escalation, and I just want to bring a little bit of positive to this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nakima Levy Armstrong, followed by Lester Collins and Mapp Moberg after that.
Good morning. My name is Nakima Levy Armstrong. I am a civil rights attorney, a former president of the Minneapolis NAACP, a former law professor, and a community activist. And I'm here as part of the Racial Justice Network to echo the concerns that have been raised about the racial profiling that has been going on at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, you all probably know I have a good relationship with Chief Rondo. I support Chief Rondo 110% in his leadership. However, Chief Rondo is aware that there are officers within his department who have engaged in harassment of Minneapolis residents, particularly residents of color, who have pulled people over, sometimes right outside my house in North Minneapolis. I have personally gone out in the middle of the night when I've seen the lights blaring and confronted officers when they have pulled people over and asked them why. And in one recent incident, two white male officers had pulled over a car with African-American people at about midnight. And when I asked the officers why they pulled the car over, they said that there was a failure to use a turn signal. And I said, these people are terrified in this car. They don't know whether this situation is going to escalate. And if you were in a predominantly white neighborhood, there is absolutely no way that you would be pulling someone over for failing to use a turn signal. It's completely unacceptable. Most of these officers do not even live within the city of Minneapolis, let alone North Minneapolis, but they are allowed to patrol us and act as if we are under siege. Now, if this is about ending crime, decreasing crime, getting guns off the street, then there are smart strategies to be able to do that. That is not what's happening. A wide net is being cast, and people's rights are being put on the back burner for an all-encompassing policy that has been going on for years and long before Chief Rondo took this leadership position. So what we're asking you all to do is to dig more deeply. Don't just say, well, we trust the chief. Yes, we all trust the chief, but the chief has hundreds of officers that he is responsible for who we know have a pattern of bad behavior on the streets, some of whom have engaged in violent conduct, many of whom have engaged in harassment and abuse of residents, and they have not been held accountable. All you all need to do is look at the dashboards for yourselves, the one that the police department has put forward, as well as the Department of Civil Rights, and you can see the history of these officers that we're talking about. It's unfair for people to feel as if they're terrorized in their own community for driving while black. So we're asking you to put forward a moratorium on these stops and to do further investigation as to the racial profiling that is going on and to make a change. As someone said earlier, that's the reason that you all were elected. Many of you ran on an equity platform, and we're tired of business as usual. We chose new leadership for a reason. So we're asking you to step up to the plate and to do something about what's going on. We haven't seen a single shift in police policy since we have been bringing these issues forward. Why is that? You all have the responsibility in your hands to do something. And lastly, I'll say to the faith leader who got up here and talked about what was happening at his church, that's wonderful. But the problem is that that undermines the testimonials of people of color who are being harassed. We know that there are good officers. That's not what this is about. This is about a culture that has wreaked havoc upon our community and has not been held accountable. So white people, if you're going to get up here, please get up here with an informed perspective about what's happening in our community. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that this is a regularly scheduled public comment period where anyone who has issues or concerns about public safety can come and share those ideas. We want to maintain a respectful tone here. All voices are welcomed, all opinions are welcomed. The public comment period was not preset for a specific topic. It's an open period for 30 minutes each time we meet. The presentations that followed are preset, and those were published in the agenda. So I just wanted to remind folks that the public comment period doesn't belong to one particular voice or issue. So we will go ahead with Mr. Lester Collins.
Good morning. My name is Lester Collins. I had not necessarily planned on speaking, but I was asked to do so. I was the director of the council, State Council on Black Minnesotans for 25 years. And sad to say that 25 years ago, statistics, information, even racial profiling as even a concept was denied, didn't exist, and set through many legislative sessions to where we finally got some type of recognition of that reality. The statistics spoke to it, and certainly the lives, the trauma, et cetera, of our young people and people of color pretty much spoke to that. It's interesting, having said that, that also Chief O'Donnell was also on my board, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. It was during that time that we were actually working on that very issue. I would just like to encourage you. I think that probably the most effective way of dealing and establishing a relationship with a community is certainly not by way of equipment stops and those kinds of things. The most is the people feeling trust, feeling comradeship, feeling partnership with individuals that are hired and instilled with the responsibility of protecting and keeping the peace. We don't have peace, and there certainly is distrust of the protection. So I would like to stand in support of the moratorium, look at it, look at the data, look at the information, work cooperatively or continue to do so with the community. I also have full faith in the chief, his efforts, but like even within a family, and I'm talking about on a personal level, there are different personalities, different influences, et cetera, that need to be checked and looked at. And I encourage you to do that today. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. Mapp Moberg, followed by Eliezer Daris, and then Amelia Hanson.
Good afternoon. I wasn't fully intending on speaking this afternoon, but Dr. Camille Armstrong asked me to, so let me say a quick word. I'm here on behalf of endorsing and asking for a moratorium on equipment violations being pulled over for the time being. But I think I need to speak on just I understand our pursuit of positivity. I understand the desire that we all have. I think that's why we're all here, is that we can have a more positive, edifying experience as a city together. But I think about my grandma. I'm a pastor in South Minneapolis. My grandpa was a pastor in South Minneapolis. I didn't get to know my grandpa very well because he spent a lot of time in jail. We had restraining orders against him. He was abusive. He was a drunk. And yet my grandma was married to him for way too long. When I asked my grandma why she stayed with him, she told me that, well, she was trying to keep her eyes on the positive things. Positivity at the expense of reality isn't good. That's how problems are perpetuated. That's how disparities are preserved. And so what we are asking is for an interruption of our status quo so we can take some substantial looks at what is happening and how we can take a direction towards real positivity, one that's actually factually rooted and not just fictionally hoped for. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So we have Eliezer Daris, followed by Amelia Hanson.
Good morning, you all. Some of you I know, some of you I've had plenty of conversations with. My name is Eliezer Daris. Eliezer is close, but Eliezer Daris. I'm with the ACLU of Minnesota. I'm actually our field director, so I handle the field ops once we're doing something out here in community. And while partly I'm here on behalf of ACLU in that we fully endorse a policy of putting a halt to some of the equipment violation stops so as to look at the culture of policing and how that's impacting community and whether or not these stops are actually net losses on behalf of the police force, on behalf of the community, and whether or not we can really look at some different ways of having those interactions. So that's partly that, but I'm here also privately and personally in that in the past 2 years, I've been pulled over 8 times. 8 times in 2 years. And I think about Philando Castile and the number of times. And so, you know, when I first started driving, I remember thinking to myself, wow, they pulled Philando over almost 50 times. That is a lot. And so now I think about myself. I've been driving for 2 years. I'm a very careful driver. And I've been pulled over 8 times in 2 years. I've been ticketed twice. The last ticket I'm actually fighting, I'll give a narrative about that ticket. We were driving down Broadway. The officer bust a U-turn and lit up a car on the side of us and followed them for a good 20 yards, then turned the lights off and got behind me and lit me up and pulled me over. And I said, and it was icy that day, and my significant other was next to me, and I was very carefully driving, and I said, well, why did you pull me over? Well, I had you speeding. I said, well, you had that other vehicle speeding, not me. You was actually 2 lanes over. So how could you have seen me speeding? How could you have tracked me speeding in a very busy street, and you followed that car for nearly 20 yards with your lights on? Oh, well, I didn't mean to light them up. I meant to light you up. Fine. So I'm fighting that when I was not speeding. The other time I did not fight that, I was speeding. The other 6 times, there was no ticket, no anything. It was just merely to question me or to ask me something. Once I blew my horn at my significant other in front of me as she was turning, and then they pulled me over. It's like, oh, we heard you blow your horn at that car. Do you know them? Like, yes, I know them. That's my significant other. We literally had that exchange back and forth 3 or 4 times before ultimately he believed that was my significant other and then let me go. Another time, an officer said that my tail lights weren't working. And so I began hitting them, and I could see my lights lighting up on his car. And he said, stop hitting them. They weren't lighting up. I said, well, they're lighting up. I'm showing you that they're lighting up. And so, like, as each of these interactions are happening, I'm actually finding myself getting more and more and more frustrated and aggravated. 8 times, 2 years, 1 actual ticket. And so, and I'm just getting frustrated. I try to understand how to conduct myself during these stops. I turn on all my lights. I put my hand on the steering wheel. I answer the questions. No, sir. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. I answer them. But I'm getting frustrated, and I'm actually getting aggravated. And I found myself in the last stop losing my composure a bit, not understanding why am I yet once again pulled over. And so, and the interactions are gruff. They're not respectful. They're rough type of interactions, and I can sense that, like, at any moment I could lose my life in the interaction. I can sense like an impending potential for death. And I always get someone else on the phone. And so I'm traumatizing the person who I get on the phone, but I know that I want to have at least another set of eyes there. And so we're just asking that we pause. I respect Chief Arredondo. My staff and I, we meet with him routinely, quarterly, and we have great conversations. We look at policies and other things that we can change. So we have a really great relationship. Well, we also recognize that there probably needs to be a cultural shift in community. We want to have a say in how that shift is happening, and we want the shift. We need the shift, and we demand the shift. It actually impacts public safety to have so many traffic stops occurring. It's impacting trust, and so we want to work on that. And this moratorium will give us an opportunity to just free some things up, bring some stakeholders to the table, and figure some different things out. Thank you all for listening to me. Have a great day.
Thank you. Amelia Hanson, followed by Don Samuels, and then Al Flowers.
Hello, my name is Amelia Hanson, and I'm here with the Racial Justice Network. I work at the library with Youth of Color. I attended the Driving While Black panel in January, and there are too many of these stories. As people have stated, it's not just stats and stories. These are lives of human beings. I hear from youth every day how they are stopped by police and feel unsafe. They're fearful. I'm here to amplify their voices. As you have heard from community today, equipment violations and racial profiling have direct negative impacts on lives. It's not right. The law should not apply to us differently because of the color of a person's skin. I am concerned by this issue, and we are coming to you with an action item. As a first step, I support an immediate moratorium now.
Thank you. Mr. Don Samuels? Welcome. And then Al Flowers after that, and that is the end of the list that I have here. Oh, never mind. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for entertaining my request to speak. I spent a few years in your chair there, and I was chair of the Public Safety Committee for 8 years. And so I know how I honor your work and all that you're doing as a committee. I'm here to speak very briefly about the fix-it ticket concept that you have on the last page. This is actually the same project as the Lights On project, which I initiated at Microgrants, where I'm CEO. And we decided to come up with this idea after Philando's death. So now, when you get pulled over by a cop in any of 25 cities, you get a voucher to get your light replaced for free. And I raised the money for all of that. So the community has been very generous, and in fact, a lot of departments thought it was a one-year program. It's actually so well-funded that it could go on forever. So this gives the cops something not just to stop doing, but something to do that's healthy and healing. And so when we read every time someone gets their car light replaced, they fill out a form that allows for a narrative of how their experience with the police. And you can see that it's truly transformative, that people are surprised. You know, everybody's got this shock when the lights go on behind them. And then it turns into an actual gift. And so we think that this is a great opportunity to turn a negative situation into a positive. And I would say we know of no incident where actually the cop gave a ticket and a lights on voucher. They give a voucher instead of a ticket. And the cops often say that they hate to give tickets to someone. You pull over a mom with 2 kids in the car seat, looking like they are on the lower end of the economic scale, and so it's like, what do you do? And now they have something to do. And so one thing I would ask is that either a staff direction or a motion be made to change the name to Lights On, because that is the original name of the project. That's what all the cities are calling it, and it's being now extended around the country. It would be great to say it was started here in Minneapolis by a former Minneapolis council member, and it was featured in the Washington Post and NBC Nightly News, so it's getting a lot of press. And this is where we're going to have our first Lights On convention, where the chiefs are going to gather here to talk about the outcomes. And I believe the mayor put $25,000 in the budget for this. And so we want that to be used for the data collection and processing. And this would be the first city to put money into this program. And so we would like it to be Minneapolis's program for the country. And so calling it Lights On would do that. So I encourage you, and we're having a great experience with it. Everybody loves it. People are putting it on their Facebook page that the cops stopped them, they got it thing. It's a great, great experience, and the cops love it. And of course, Bobby and Steve's that does the work, they do it for free. And shops all over the region are asking, why aren't we doing it too? So there are other repair shops who are saying we would do it for free. So here's a solution that's a win-win situation for the community, the police, and the providers. So thank you for your time. And what we're hoping is that over time we will raise enough money that we'll be able to address not just lights, but other kinds of mechanical malfunction, so that every time the cop stops someone for any equipment violation, there's a high likelihood that it will turn into an interaction that's healing and relieving for the person who stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Mr. L. Flowers, followed by Tanisha Gibson and Lewis Davis after that.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. Boy, this is the first time I might be making history agreeing with former council member Samuels on so I don't know what's happening here today, but I'm gonna say that. And I ran into council member Warsami out in the hall, and he said I'm working for the police. So I don't know what's going on, but we're gonna keep it real. And I'm talking about our priorities in our community, in the African American community, descendant of the slave. And I appreciate everybody up here talking about racial and social justice and all that. But our justice is going to be when we stop violence within our community. That's what we're trying to do. I've been over to the state legislature working with Representative Mariani on the Public Safety Committee, Representative Ray Dean, and we're trying to get something put in the community. I'm working with St. Paul and Minneapolis. Right now, we're putting it together to work with each community to try to stop the violence. These issues here, they bring up the mediation agreement in 2003 to 2009. I was on that mediation team, but and I know everybody that's still around that was on the mediation team. They not at these tables where they talking about, and everybody comes up and say, we support Chief Arredondo. Well, if you did, then you would sit down and figure this out together. But this is about publicity. Everybody, now it's all social media, publicity, and what feels good to you that you can put online and say, this is what we're working on, this is what we stop, whether it's lurking and loitering, whether it's this issue about driving while black. When I go to the meeting, and Councilmember Fletcher, you there, it was all white people at that meeting, and probably 5 or 6 blacks. That's what we want here. You have a white pastor get up here to talk. Where's our black pastors at? Because you got to work with everybody. But I know where our community is. We're talking about what we can do economically, about housing, about education, about public safety. Those are our issues. But we get clouded in our community when these kind of issues come up, because it's easy to say I hate the police, or they driving, or they doing things like that. I'm not saying this ain't the moratorium. I don't know nothing about it. Like I said, what former Councilmember Samuel said might be a great idea to look at. But what I ask you as an activist, as a person in the community, as a person that worked with you head on, Councilmember Fletcher, on doing things to uplift people in the community on different races area. Now I'm asking you again, I keep coming down here, I'm saying we need the support of the city. I met with Councilmember Ellison, waiting to meet with, setting up the meeting with Councilmember Cunningham. Councilmember Jenkins, we just had a bus driver shot. You know, these are the kind of things that I wake up every day to think about and what's happening to us in our community. And I need y'all to uplift that. This is easy right here. It's easy to say, you know, we don't want the police to pull us over. I don't either. But is that a priority? Do they get to take all the energy away from violence when you're talking about the police, when you're talking about do they get to take away all the energy, Councilmember Cano? Is that what we're going to do? Or are we going to try to stop some of this, what's going on, and try to help economically, education-wise? But to do that, we need support from the council on this public safety. Let that be a top priority. Let that be a top priority. Racial justice people, help us in our community without violence. When we're talking about violence, nobody's here. Nobody's here. We need. I support I am one that was always arguing and fighting with the police, with the city council. But I'm saying now we got a problem about violence in our community. To my white progressive people in the community, support us.
Mr. Flowers, we just need to make sure that you're directing your comments towards us so that we can keep the meeting going. And there's one more speaker after you, and then we have the presentation by MPD. So I'm sorry if you're done. If you can please. Sit, and then we can have the next person come.
Okay, then, I shouldn't address, but I was asking for help. I try to ask for help where I can, and I'm saying it to y'all again because we're putting together a big patch with the churches, with the urban league, with the organization. Hold on, Councilmember Cano, because everybody went way over, so just let me finish this, and then I'm going to sit down. But the urban league, the black churches, every organization that represents us is on board. You can't let individuals run the game. And that's what you're doing. And I know what's happening. So you can continue, and then when we get to April and the shooting starts and all the things start happening, you can't run away and hide because I brought it to you. I mean, I'm going to keep bringing it. Every time they bring up something like I think is garbage, when we dine, I'm going to keep coming back every time. But I'm saying our churches are black. When you say African-American descendant of the slave, we got the support.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you're meeting with some of the council members. Thank you, Mr. Flowers.
Okay, thank you.
We have up next is Tanisha Gibson, followed by Lewis Davis, and I don't have any names after that. So if you're here to speak, please make sure you sign up over here with our city clerk.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today? So I decided to speak today. I am a mother, a community activist, and an organizer in my community. I have a 26-year-old son, a 22-year-old daughter, and an 11-year-old son. I know I am much older than I look, but I would just like to offer some suggestions, to the council, to the police, and all the people involved in this topic of traffic enforcement. This is 2019, and the stake of our future is really important right now. We have the ability, the power, and the right people elected to change the practices and misbehavior of people that don't follow the rules. It's very simple. We need the police to protect us. And if there are police that won't follow the rules of their chief or their mayor or the people that have the ability to enforce change, they gotta go. It's that simple. They have to go. And it is not only the responsibility of the leadership, but the people as well. We have to figure out a way to unite and have a better solution for the people. And last but not least, I would like to address what that looks like. Humanity. We need to get back to humanity. We are human beings. Most people have made mistakes. Some people have changed and become better people from their mistakes. But we have to set the example and standards. And I say that because as a young person, I grew up in a very good household, but I was in the wrong environment, so I made some poor decisions. And I use that as an influence for my children. And so I am able to stand here and say that I have very respectable children that contribute to our community. But that is what we need to do. We have to set the standards and we have to set better examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Lewis Davis.
Good morning. This is my first time getting involved with something like this. I'm a retired Army veteran. I grew up here, and I had to watch in horror during my last couple of years the misdeeds of the Minneapolis police. Chief Arredondo notwithstanding, you guys failed. All of you. We trusted you. And you guys found excuse after excuse to gun down unarmed people. I've operated in hotter zones than any of you guys have. Any of you.
Mr. Davis, if you could just please speak to us, I would really appreciate that.
This is directed towards them. I understand. But look, it greatly saddens me to hear the same scenario time and time again. It saddens me to hear the same narrative time and time again. It leads me to ask, are we in a war zone? Last time I checked, this isn't Iraq. Last time I checked, this isn't Afghanistan. Last time I checked, there's no roadside bombs. Last time I checked, there is no artillery. There's nobody running around with a suicide vest trying to blow people up. So again, are we in a war zone? What frustrates me more is that the officers in this city, again, Chief Arredondo notwithstanding, since he just came on board, they've conducted themselves in a manner similar to the criminals that we've entrusted them to apprehend and keep off our streets. You guys, they want our respect. Well, in order to earn the respect of the black community, you guys need some rules of engagement. Stop viewing us as a threat, because we aren't. Calandro Castillo was no more of a threat than I am right now. He didn't have a firearm in his hand. Yet still, that officer, even though he wasn't part of the Minneapolis Police Department, he discharged a firearm and endangered the lives of two people, not just the individual he opened fire on. I had to go through a similar situation years ago, where a St. Paul police officer down near clipped my car. I pulled over so I could talk with him and see if everything was okay, give him the courtesy. What happened is that I ended up with a floodlight on me and a weapon drawn. Even after I identified myself as active duty, his exact words were, "I don't care what you're in." What? Really? I could have died right then and there. That officer could have blown me away, and the next thing you know, we have to deal with the smear campaign. You're trying to look at what kind of a person he was, how much trouble this individual got into, to cover their behinds. So I offer rules of engagement. Rules of engagement. First off, during any routine stop, whether I don't care what time of day or night it is, your hand should be nowhere near your firearm. They should be in a neutral position. Period. Because guess what? During my deployment, I had a long list of steps I had to go through before my thumb even touched the selector lever, let alone before my finger touched the trigger and I raised my weapon to take aim. In the event of a discharge of a firearm, there is no cooling period. These officers don't get an opportunity to sit back and corroborate their story. They have to answer right then and there. All footage should be made public right then and there. Let us decide. Why? Because we're the ones that have to deal with this. We're the ones that have to worry about our sons and daughters getting gunned down or ourselves getting gunned down. In the event that there is wrongdoing, no paid leave. That officer sits in a cell just like any one of us would have if we discharged a firearm, if we pointed a weapon at someone. Those rules need to apply to them. They should be held to a much higher standard than we do. There is no excuse for this. It needs to stop. I don't want to find myself in this room having this same conversation with this same group of people. Enough. All right, I have other things to worry about other than the possibility that I might get blown away because some cop thought I was reaching for a firearm, even though I was sitting up there complying. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Are there any other folks that would like to share their public comment? If so, please come up to the microphone right here to the podium and just state your name, and we can have you sign up with the clerk when you're finished.
My name is Janet Nye, and I live at 2112 Portland Avenue South. It's sad that the community has to ask for this moratorium on a legitimate function of police. The responsibility for this lies with the police chief and other hierarchy for consistently not disciplining and firing rogue officers. I'm white, but I'm a human being first. I understand when black people say that they fear when they are stopped by police, because I saw the videos of Philando Castile's murder. This easily could have happened in Minneapolis. That officer had problems that were known but unaddressed by his superiors. People tried to complain about him, but the police department would not take their complaints. Literally, I actually know somebody who tried to complain and was told, bye, we don't want to hear what you have to say. We have this going on in Minneapolis as well. I followed complaints about police conduct through the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. It is virtually never that officers are disciplined for using the N-word, the F-word, and the B-word and others. There's also a lot of sarcasm going on, and I think that's the most disrespectful thing you can do to a person. It's worse than, using racial epithets, because sarcasm does not give you any room to come back. And it's totally disrespectful. To get through to this, we need to look to Ferguson, where a substantial amount of revenue was gained through profiling. Do we want this to happen here? It's been close a few times in the city of Minneapolis, and it really all comes down to money. And that's so disgusting. We have plenty of money in this city to take care of all our problems. All the homeless. My God, they're not going to decrease. Fry has not, and you have not taken care of the homeless. You took money and built a couple of stadiums. You spend a hell of a lot of money on police liability things, tons of money. And in fact, in St. Paul, it's so bad that they're dipping into their regular budget to pay off the crimes of police. So I think it's time to open our eyes and do something right. It's in your hands. Otherwise, well, there's always the gilets jaunes.
Thank you. Seeing that this is our last speaker for the public comment period, I want to thank you all for coming to share your perspectives with us. Before we move to receive and file, I would like to acknowledge that we have been joined by Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins and Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison. Councilmember Cunningham had to step out for another meeting he had on city business and apologizes for not being able to continue with us today, but he will be logging in to make sure he follows the meeting as it continues. So with that, we will receive and file these public comments. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we are moving on now to the discussion part of our agenda, where our next item will be a presentation by the Minneapolis Police Department on the traffic enforcement data. And it is related to a lot of the questions and concerns that the community members have brought up this morning. So we hope to have a robust discussion here and hope that time will allow for that. So please, whoever is here to start off the presentation, go ahead and take the podium. Welcome, Chief and staff.
Good morning, Chair Cano, council members. I want to thank you for convening this public presentation on Minneapolis Police Department traffic overview. I also want to say in this space that I'm very thankful and appreciative for our community members who are here out of thoughtfulness, out of compassion, and out of care for our communities, and how our Minneapolis Police Department is engaging as it relates to our community through traffic stops. I will say that this is a very brief overview. For those of you who have taken a look at our public data on this, it's very extensive. There's a lot there. We could certainly talk for hours related to this. I certainly want to make myself available for those community members who would like to have a further, deeper conversation about this. But in the few minutes that I will do this overview, I will try to capture the data. I will also try to capture if there's some context and nuance to this, but also certainly more importantly be here to answer questions that you may have. So the first slide that you will see is something that a couple of years ago when I was in my role as deputy chief, I thought it was very important in terms of transparency and building trust that we as a police organization, we as the Minneapolis Police Department, that we did not hold on to, and I frankly called it those three words, the people's data. I did not believe that as a culture of policing in terms of building trust, that the times that our community needed and wanted our engagement information, that they should have to go through a records information request or through court orders. This is the people's data, as I still affectionately call it today, and I'm proud to say that we are one of the few departments in the nation that puts out and disseminates this type of information, is readily available for our community because it is their data. And I'm also, when I knew back then that we were going to roll this out, the conversations that we are having today is exactly what I wanted. This is prompting important, relevant conversations that are reflective of the concerns that our community has, and certainly as me as chief in terms of how we build and change culture and build trust that we need so much in our community. So I'm glad that the slides you see here, the people's data, I'm glad that we are able to disseminate and get all of this data, this information out to our public so we can have these important conversations. As it relates to traffic enforcement with the Minneapolis Police Department, I think it's important to note that over the last 10 years in the Minneapolis Police Department, our traffic law enforcement has actually decreased approximately 70%. So the effort of Minneapolis police officers conducting traffic enforcement throughout our city has actually gone down quite significantly. In the slide you'll see there's a red asterisk that notes the year of 2013. 2013 is significant because that is the year that our citywide traffic unit was dissolved. So that'll be important in terms of context when we go into the further slides, but I think it's important to note that the engagement that so many in our community have had with the Minneapolis Police Department through traffic stops, historically over the past decade, that enforcement of traffic laws has actually decreased almost 70% in the last 10 years. Now, the next slide, because some of the traffic stop strategies that we are utilizing in the city, we are trying to focus on areas in our city that have more prevalence of gun violence and where more victims of gun violence, where that is occurring. In the past 2 years in Minneapolis, particularly the 4th Precinct, we have seen through our efforts of our group or our gang enforcement team activity that has been conducting a lot of the traffic enforcement in North Minneapolis, we have seen a 2-year decrease in the victims of gunshot violence in Minneapolis, and particularly in North Minneapolis. There's also disparity of victims of these gunshot wounds. In 2018, last year, citywide, there were 244 people actually struck by gunfire. 190 of those victims were African Americans. So almost 8 out of 10 of our victims of gunshot violence were African American. In North Minneapolis, the race of the shooting victims in North Minneapolis are almost 9 out of 10. So in the 4th Precinct, there were 134 people that were actually wounded and struck by gunfire last year. That accounts for over 50 or 53% of the total victims of gunshot violence in Minneapolis. So how does this play into the traffic stops that have occurred last year specifically in Minneapolis. So if we look at the precincts in this slide here that you see here, in terms of recovering guns during traffic stops, we see that the 4th Precinct Patrol and the gang interdiction team that primarily has operated in North Minneapolis make up the bulk of these traffic stops where guns have been seized and recovered. If you compare that to other precincts, whether it's the 1st Precinct that recovered 7 guns in traffic stops or 2nd Precinct that recovered 4, 4th Precinct, their district patrols recovered 34, and our gang interdiction team that has operated primarily in North Minneapolis to reduce the harm and gun violence in that collected over 28 guns itself. But there were over 664 guns recovered in traffic stops last year alone. Many of you know in this room that our group violence initiative, our GET teams, are not only focused on trying to reduce group violence that occurs in our city, but they're also working with our GVI team to provide services to help young men, particularly black and brown young men, receive services, whether it's GEDs, housing, mental health services. So it is a two-pronged approach and not just strictly an enforcement approach. So a question has been raised through these important conversations about the searches of persons and vehicles during these traffic stops. And I want to note that if you look at the slide here, for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, even the 4th Precinct, as well as the 5th Precinct and some of our special operations, our searches and traffic stops by these units are pretty much flatlined. Also, if you look at the traffic stops and searches of persons, it's pretty much the same. Where you see the largest indicator in the bar graph is through our gang enforcement teams. They make up the bulk of the searches of either vehicles or persons during these traffic stops. Out of all the traffic stops performed, about 9.7% of the traffic stops resulted in a person search, and about 9.6% of those traffic stops resulted in a vehicle search. As chief, why is traffic enforcement also important, particularly in our most challenged communities? This slide here states that our traffic crashes in Minneapolis are more concentrated in neighborhoods with more people that live in low income. 40% of the crashes results in these neighborhoods that are affected by low income and poverty that only make up only 30% of the population. It is unconscionable to me that our friends, neighbors, and family that happen to live in low-income neighborhoods are more susceptible to both vehicle and pedestrian crashes. Traffic enforcement is a tool to help keep those communities and our communities safe. As Mr. Don Samuels was here earlier, and I applaud his work in creating here in this state, in this city, the Lights On program. That is another opportunity that we also want to do to utilize for those individuals who may have equipment violations. In terms of collective healing, we want to make sure that our officers are issuing the lights on or fix it, not ticket vouchers as another way that we can also help those individuals who may have perhaps financial challenges in getting that equipment fixed. But that's another thing that we're going to do. Also, the screenshot you see there, we will be making sure that our officers can track the number of fix-it, not ticket citations that are issued to help folks get those repairs done. That is a very brief overview, but I know that this was more to have a robust discussion for me to answer questions that you may have. So thank you for allowing me that time.
Thank you, Chief. And if folks have any questions or comments, this would be a good time to do so. So we'll start with Councilmember Lenny Palmisano, and then move this way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions. I think I'll ask a couple of them and then pause for my colleagues. Chief Arredondo, are your traffic stops similar to New York stop and frisk detail? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Palmisano. I'll beg for forgiveness right now because I do not have a legal law degree, but I will try to talk to the New York stop and frisk court decision that was ruled unconstitutional as best as I can. So if I should say anything that is not accurate, please forgive me, it's not intentional. During a 10-year period in New York City between 2002 and about 2012, New York City Police Department, through its top leadership down to its officers, had engaged in a practice of stop and frisk with the premise to reduce violence on the city streets of New York by having their officers engage in what is typically called a Terry stop. This basically is if the law had stated that if officers have reasonable suspicion to believe that a person has either committed a crime, is about to commit one, and they believe that they are carrying a weapon or contraband, that if they have reasonable suspicion, they can conduct basically a pat search of their person to look for weapons or contraband. What New York, what the courts had seen over that 10-year time was that the number of stops increased dramatically every year, that the vast percentage, the majority, 90% of the individuals stopped were typically black and brown young men between the ages of 14 and 24. And the vast majority of the time, these individuals were innocent. These were illegal stops. The courts ruled and they were unconstitutional. What was further problematic is that the New York City Police Department had set up a quota system. And they also had set up a performance matrix system that said that they based the officers' value to the police department on how many of these people, black and brown young men, that they stopped, regardless of if they yielded any contraband. The courts ruled that was unconstitutional. And there were even officers within the New York City Police Department that recorded some of these interactions and some of the mandates that their superiors had them do. So I will tell you that the Minneapolis Police Department, under my leadership, does not have any performance matrix associated with traffic stops, and it never will. We will not engage in any quotas, and we do not, and we have not. We will conduct legal traffic stops. While the outcomes in terms of those who are arrested or cited may be disparate based on race, I think that we should be cautious in conflating the protocols in practice. The courts ruled rightfully, I believe, that was unconstitutional. One of the things, and we talked about culture change in the Minneapolis Police Department, one of the things that I was very intentional on doing a few years ago was making sure that officers today in their mobile digital computers, they must indicate and document the reason or basis for the stop. Our officers, through technology, they cannot clear and go to the next call without indicating the reason or the basis for the stop. Why is that significant? In 2013, there was a decision out in New York, I believe it was Floyd versus the United States. The courts ruled that the New York City Police Department had to start indicating and mandating that officers must indicate the reason and the basis for the stop. That's significant here because we had been doing that for the last several years. When you don't do that, that erodes trust. And I need to make sure that we are indicating everything that's legal. We're making sure that these are legal stops. We're making sure that we put as much demographic information in that and that we can have the types of conversations that we are having today. And so, no, I would not compare the New York City stop and frisk tactics or protocols, both the informal and informal quotas and performance matrix that were placed upon that department. I would not compare that to the Minneapolis Police Department. So, yeah.
Thank you. If I may, just a couple quick follow-ups to what you said, Chief. Can they change the reason or basis for the stop after the fact? It seems like we've heard testimony today that would suggest that. Can an officer go back and change the reason or basis for a stop?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Palmisano, they cannot. Once they enter that information, the basis for the stop, into the mobile digital computer, that is set. The other check and balance that we have is that our traffic stops now are captured, as you know, on body-worn camera video. So if there are challenges to the legitimacy of those stops, our our department, internal affairs, OPCR, attorneys, public defenders can check that video and see if the stop was done correctly, if it was done legally, if the officer was acting in a professional manner, what have you. But they cannot change that once that is entered.
Thank you. And just a question on this slide, the people's data. And
yes.
By the way, for anybody here, there's a huge piece of paper taped up on almost a whole wall in my office that shows how this data gets to be live in the dashboard, and it's really interesting. There's a huge amount of work to put this kind of information up. So thank you for having this up and prompting some of these conversations. But so within this data, I'm curious, because of some of the ways that we've talked about, ways we could improve on these stops, are you able to run license plates without a traffic stop? Like, I assume license plate lookups are tightly regulated, just like driver's license lookups, but can you just run plates as a vehicle goes by?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Palmisano, our officers have to have a legal justification for that, so they have to observe some sort of violation to do that. Many of you might be aware that over the past couple of years, our State Department of Motor Vehicle Services have really been very intentional and even punitive regarding public employees, police officers, using and looking up driver's license plates for a non-business reason. We have even dealt with that internally as a police department over the last several years. So officers need to make sure that there is a legal justification for running that plate.
Thank you. And how do we track, you have in here the pre-stop race of the individual and then the race of the individual. Can you help remind me, how do we track the race of those stopped in Minneapolis? And is it in the police report?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Palmisano, when we created this, we knew a couple of things. We knew that we wanted to capture data that the officer may initiate, but we also know that sometimes we're going to have citizens calling in to initiate an officer action. So our dispatcher, one of two ways that this happens, our dispatcher can notify the officer that the caller is saying that the individual that they want them to respond to is a white male or African-American male or Native male. The officer may then get to the scene and after observations or identification may say that this individual is actually not white but Native, and the officer can put the correct race in there. So we're able to track the caller's initial information of an individual race as well as the officer once at the scene and confirms it.
I see. Thanks. I'll pause here because there's other questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. And now we have Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief, for this presentation. I want to ask a couple of questions, and I guess the first one is, as I understand it, if an officer sees a car with someone in it that they decide for whatever reason they want to talk to that person, so they want a chance to have an interaction with that person because they think something might be up. If there's a taillight out, they can use that pretext for it to be a legal stop. But it's a pretext stop, right? It's not, they're probably not out looking for people with taillights out. They're creating a pretext to have a conversation with somebody. I mean, is that an appropriate understanding of how many of these stops are happening?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Fletcher. So yes, if an officer sees an equipment violation, they can absolutely make the traffic stop and then engage in the conversation with the individual.
Mm-hmm. And so if there was racial bias by a police officer, if they saw someone and said, sort of based on an assumption, based on someone's racial background, and they see that their taillight is out, they can stop them, and that's legal, and that's part of how this could be operating.
Chair Cano to Councilmember Fletcher, I want to be careful because I'm getting into the mindset of the employee to say that they're doing that racially motivated. Officers should not be making any sort of engagement within our community based upon race. And we're very adamant in that in terms of our policies, in our vision statement, and that should never be tolerated and won't be tolerated by me. So that's yeah, that's how I can answer. Yeah.
And if we were to do a moratorium on equipment stops, and it feels to me like if we're worried about the safety implications of doing equipment stops, right? Like there's some amount of safety implication of like a brake light being out or a tail light being out. Sending someone a postcard that says, hey, your tail light's out and here's how you can get that fixed for free feels like it would achieve the same safety outcome. And so I guess it feels to me like if there is a safety component to this, it's that we are using it as pretext. And that there is some amount of our efforts to get guns off the streets or some other reason that we're wanting to not seriously consider a moratorium when we've asked about this. So I guess my question is, if we were to do a moratorium on equipment stops, on equipment violations, would other pretext be found? In the cases where we're looking for pretext, would we end up, I've heard somebody say you really can't, like no driver can drive more than 5 blocks without giving an officer some reason to pull them over if they really want to. So my question is, do we fix the pretext problem by doing a moratorium on equipment violations if that's the community concern that's being brought?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher. So I've heard the conversation surrounding moratoriums. As chief, I have to be very. I just have to be very concerned about stopping a legitimate police practice that can help save lives, and also the liability from not only a police department standpoint, but from a city. And so I have not had a conversation with, for example, some of my team, more community that's impacted by this, and quite frankly, our legal counsel with the city. I don't know what that would look like, so yeah.
Okay. I'll have a few more things to say about this, but I'll yield to my colleagues for other questions.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. So I appreciate the data, and I think this is a tremendous asset for us as the council to have and for the city to have. I did have some questions. I know a lot of the testimony, which I know is open testimony that anyone can come give, but a lot of the testimony that we're heard today in our public comment section was specifically about equipment violations. And I know that in the data set that we have, it's a more broad exploration of traffic stop, traffic enforcement in general, but I think that a lot of the testimony today was focused on that 17.9% on the graph here for reasons to stop. And would there be any way to sort of rearrange this entire data set based on, using that focus really on that 18% there for equipment violations?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Ellison. So if I'm hearing you correctly, would there be another strategy that we could look at specifically to equipment violations?
No. So I'm asking, for the other data sets, vehicle searched, person searched, pre-stop race, could we have all those data sets sort of be just focused on equipment violations? Because as it stands, it's a more broad look at all of our traffic enforcement.
Chair Cano to Councilmember Ellison. He's here for a reason. He is our data expert. So,
awesome.
Yes.
The data guy.
Yes. My name is Sergeant Jeff Agee. That's the Strategic Analysis Unit. Council member. This is just a screen print of the dashboard. In the functionality of the dashboard, and I think I prefer looking at it on the tablet, right? But where you can actually have the functionality. And what we could do is, if you click on, for instance, on the actual operational dashboard, you click on this, and what it does is it repopulates.
Okay.
And it repopulates all these categories in terms of whether or not the vehicle was searched, the person searched, the pre-stop race, as well as the race, gender, and all of these disposition codes. And then, in this particular case, I think we have designated here a year. It also shows you this map as well. You limit this with a sliding scale of the dates, and it gives you you can actually use this map to look at where those stops are taken. So it gives you this idea of this dashboard gives you that functionality on any one of these reasons for the stops.
Awesome, I appreciate that. Also, if we were to kind of zoom in on that, on the equipment violations, and I know this isn't presented here, but it's in a later data set, the number of guns recovered sort of via equipment violation stops specifically, so we'd be able to sort of extrapolate that data as well.
The gun recoveries isn't in the collection of the data.
Okay.
Yeah, and to your previous question, one of the things, this is when you're asking about whether or not it can be changed and things, this is the actual, this fix-it ticket right here. This is actually the clearing screen from the officers, and they can touch these areas and actually fill in this data.
Okay.
The gun recovery is something that happens mainly in the report management system rather than the CAD system. This is in the computerized dispatch.
Yeah. I ask all this because I think some of the concern is whether or not, equipment violations specifically. I don't think any of us want to see people who are turning when they shouldn't turn on a red, or speeding through our neighborhood. I know my constituents wouldn't want us to allow people to just speed through the neighborhood and those kinds of things. But with that focus on equipment violations, I guess my question and what I would want, hopefully for the public to gain a better understanding of is what are the implications as far as life safety if we were to remove that tool. And I think that's sort of the question that a lot of people who showed up today are asking, is of course traffic enforcement in its whole presents, various forms of life safety. We're able to preserve life through making sure that people aren't speeding down our streets, through making sure that people aren't turning, sometimes we're protecting others, sometimes we're protecting the driver themselves from themselves if they're driving irresponsibly. But in terms of the threat to the public that a taillight might, a broken taillight might present, versus some of the anecdotal experience that testimony that we've heard today, what are we gaining in terms of preservation of life when it comes to enforcing equipment violations versus what are we losing and what are we eroding in terms of trust? And we all work in policy. We all know that we can have great policies at a high level, and then once that interpersonal interaction between an officer and a civilian is a lot harder for it's impossible for us to track. It's hard for you to track. But what are we getting? If we were to eliminate or greatly limit this tool, what would we be losing in terms of preserving life versus what would we be gaining in building trust or that kind of thing? So, yeah.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Ellison, I think that is an absolutely great point. So earlier when the question was asked of me about considering moratoriums thing, that's exactly why I want to, I know that there's a lot of spirit, a lot of passion behind this discussion about moratorium. I need to make sure that I've examined and explored all of those considerations on behalf of those people that in our communities that could be impacted by it. You mentioned the trust piece, and I think, so I will share that there was a recent research study that looked at cities that were most impacted by gun violence. One of the key things that those community members who were impacted by gun violence, not homicides, but shootings, one of the key things that eroded trust for them was that the police department, because of a volume of those cases, could not properly investigate those cases, and those individuals who had committed harm to those community members were still walking in and about their communities. That had a direct impact on the trust between those that police department and the community. I need to make sure before I pull any tool off the table that won't also impact or erode the trust of those communities that are impacted by perhaps traffic or vehicle or pedestrian safety. So I'm not saying that the conversation isn't a valid one. It is a valid one. That's why we're here. But we talk about trust. To me, to simply pull off a tool, I think I need to engage more of our community. I think I need to listen more, learn more, be educated, and make sure that in the ultimate I'm doing what's right. And I think we can have two conversations because there is a historical trauma that is associated with traffic stops in our city. I absolutely understand that. But I don't want to be quick to just pull something off. The data needs to tell our story. We need to do a deeper dive, in my opinion. So,
yeah, and I definitely agree that we shouldn't make off-the-cuff decisions. But I appreciate your willingness to engage in this conversation. I appreciate community members bringing this conversation to City Hall. So, thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. and thank you, Chief Arredondo. I represent neighborhoods in the 3rd precinct and in the 5th precinct, and because of the 35W project that is currently happening in and throughout the ward, my constituents are begging for more traffic enforcement, and so and it really is, as some people have mentioned, these issues are dramatically highlighted by the shooting yesterday from a routine traffic accident. People are just really frustrated with being on the roads and being sort of, I guess, inconvenienced by road construction, snow, ice, the things that we live with in Minnesota every day. But that being said, I'm curious about slide number 9 or page number 9, searches by unit. And I'm hoping that you can discuss that in a little more detail, because it seems that, again, the majority of the searches after a stop are occurring in the 4th precinct, and just wanting you to expound on that a little bit further.
Chair Cano, Council Vice President Jenkins, yes. So the graphic in the slide that you see on slide 9 shows the percent of persons and also vehicles that are searched by every precinct, but obviously the largest slide discrepancies you see there are from the gang enforcement team. We started back in 2017 as a result to try to curb the gun violence in our city. We created GVI and our gang enforcement team. These are officers with the sole purpose to, through intelligence, through working with our community messengers, many of them you probably know, Ferone Brown, Manaluz, to Ms. Sasha Cotton, to work with both doing the 2 tracks, identifying those group members who are on probation, who are who have committed violence in our communities, and we're receiving also intelligence that they may also be, whether it's a retaliatory shooting or what have you. They're focused on gathering that intelligence, working with our GVI members, and basically going where that propensity of violence is occurring in our city. So that is why you see the discrepancy. So both our GET team members are also conducting traffic stops in our city, as well as conducting both those vehicle searches and person searches. So they make up the bulk of the searches that you're seeing in this graphic indicated. They do far more, as you see, than any other precinct, because they have, by the way, the other lines you see for the precincts, those are typically just the primary district squads, making a traffic stop, a speeding stop, a U-turn, illegal U-turn. They're making those. The gang enforcement team is both conducting TLAs. They're primarily doing that based on perhaps intelligence. They can still see through their observation if they're seeing a traffic stop or a motor vehicle violation or a moving violation. They're making those, but they are primarily working where they have the discretion, they have the time to go out and try to reduce harm in our community. So that's, I hope I explained it, but that's the discrepancy. So they are making vehicle searches, person searches, but that's what they're doing.
So in the other precincts, 1, 2, 3, and 5, what prompts a search? It's a regular traffic stop, the brake lights are out, they pull a person over. What prompts a search?
Chair Cano to Council Vice President Jenkins, it can be a myriad of things. It can be more frequently it's search incident to an arrest. And so they could stop someone for DUI and end up perhaps doing also a vehicle inventory search. They could make a traffic stop based on a moving violation. They may have individuals in the car that have warrants before taking them to jail or transporting them. They can do a search of the person. There's kind of a host of different things in which the officers can engage in either vehicle or person search. For example, our GET team, they may end up having information or intel that there was a shooter recently involved in a shooting, and they observe a traffic violation. That person is known to carry weapons, and they may do a pat search of that person and do a search and recover a weapon or what have you. So it can vary based upon the circumstance.
You've been doing this work for a number of years, I think close to 30 years.
Chair Cano, to Council Vice President Jenkins, I'm only 25, so I don't know if your math is right. So,
but I'm curious, in your estimation, what may be some other methods to accomplish the same types of goals that you're hoping to accomplish with these traffic?
Chair Cano, Council Vice President Jenkins. So one of the things that I want to go back, because a gentleman said this during his comments, and I think it's very important and relevant. I never want to lead in fear. There's no reason to do that. I think that erodes trust. And so it's important for me as chief to listen and hear from all of our constituents. Everybody who spoke today is concerned. They want to live in safer communities. They want to have a police department that they trust and can look upon, that their children can. And so that's what this conversation, that's what this data is doing. It's prompting a discussion about how we can do it. And by the way, I should note that traffic enforcement is just one tool. It's just one tool that we use. It doesn't have to be the only tool. So as chief, I'm absolutely open to talking to those most impacted, our communities, and asking them, what are some other ways you'd like to see us help reduce and work with you to collaborate to reduce crime in your communities? So I don't have an answer to that. I think out of respect for our communities, I want to listen and hear from them. I think they may have some wonderful ideas, but it's one tool. Traffic enforcement is just one tool. It certainly, as you mentioned, Council Vice President Jenkins, in your ward, you got some of your constituents that say we need it. They're begging for it. There are others who want to maybe perhaps see it utilized differently. And so I'm absolutely open to having those conversations. So.
And proactivity has not gone down.
Sergeant Iggy just mentioned, Chair Cano to Council Vice President Glidden, even with the dip that you've seen since 2000, the 10-year dip, Did I say Glidden? I am so. My eyes are bad. I'm so sorry. So for the record, Chair Cano, she said that, not me. So Council Vice President Jenkins, as you can note from the screen, even though our traffic enforcement has decreased substantially, our proactivity has not. And I also want to note that we are able to indicate, and we have for the last couple of years, what you value, you measure. We track positive engagement, and that has continued to increase. So that being said, I still want to your very important question, I still want to make sure that I'm listening, leaning in, learning from all of you as you govern, as well as our community here, to see that, once again, that's one tool. There's other alternatives we can look at and talk about. So, yeah.
So I do just want to lift up, some of the comments that have been stated here is that, this violence is happening in predominantly African American communities. It's impacting predominantly African American people, and it's being perpetrated in many instances predominantly by African American people, and we have to address that problem as well. These traffic stops are very deeply concerning, but the issues of people being murdered in our communities are equally, even more so concerning for me. And getting to some resolutions to curb those instances is my deepest concern.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. Can we go to slide number 7? Yeah, there we go. So, Chief, I think either you misspoke or there's something confusing about the data, so I just want to make sure we get clarity for the record. So 664 is the total number of guns seized by all methods, right? Not traffic stops.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, you're correct.
And then the total gun seized by traffic stops is 97 guns, correct?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, that is correct, yes.
Okay. So I just want to share, I'm really appreciative of the community members who came here today, and we heard a variety of perspectives, and they're all really important perspectives. And I think one of the things that we heard is a need for culture change. And one of the things that we have to be able to do as part of our culture change is to be able to challenge tactics without turning into a defensive frame of you're either for the police or you're against the police, you either care about violence or you're listening to reformers, and those things are pitted against each other, and they cannot be pitted against each other. We have to both care about gun violence in our communities and be able to question tactics and question strategies and ask, is this getting to the right place? That's where our leadership role comes in, right? I mean, that's where your leadership role comes in, is that we have to be able to look at this. And so what we know, based on the data we have, and I'll say, I want to, just to be responsive to the folks who came here asking for a moratorium now, I'll say we're not ready to do that today, and we need to do a deeper dive on the data, and I think it's clear that we have a bunch of questions that we're going to need to get answered, right? If my math is right, we did 40,000 stops to get 97 guns. So 0.25% of the traffic stops resulted in seizing a weapon. So to put that into context, if we do 400 traffic stops, we have one gun, and we have 399 people who trust the police a little less and feel like they got profiled. I mean, that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's what the data looks like it shows me. Does that sound about right in terms of the numbers?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, I would only push back in the notion that the traffic stops alone were just utilized to recover guns. When people are violating traffic speeds, rolling down side streets or residential streets at a clip where kids are playing in the street, DUI enforcement. So I just think that the premise that we are only conducting traffic law enforcement to recover guns is not accurate. Of the traffic stops that we did, we recovered guns, absolutely, but our traffic enforcement isn't based upon solely just recovering guns. Yeah.
But I will say this, though. I think part of the reason that this is coming up, and I want to be real clear, because I take Council Vice President Jenkins' comments very seriously, and I'll say my constituents are saying the same thing. We are feeling the lack of traffic enforcement for the sake of traffic enforcement. And I think when you see that that number go down as substantially as it has, we've dropped to 70% in our traffic enforcement stops. I think part of why this is coming up is that the pretext stops used to be an understandable pretext because we were doing actual traffic enforcement. We were pulling people over when we just saw them doing, turning right on red when they weren't supposed to, or blowing through a traffic light. And I don't think anybody believes that that's really happening much anymore. I mean, I can tell you, like, I have people routinely try to assassinate me with their vehicles while I'm trying to walk my dog to Golden Meadow Park. And I have never seen, like, even when I'm calling the precinct and asking for it, I mean, it's something that we've been talking about in the 1st and 2nd precinct, all kinds of ways that we're not protecting pedestrians, that we're not protecting bicyclists, that we're not actually managing traffic to manage traffic. So it feels like right now, a much higher percentage of the stops that we're doing are pretext, and the pretext is almost the tail wagging the dog now. Is sort of what it feels like in the data. So I want to just really challenge us to be honest with people about why are we doing traffic stops? When are we putting hours into doing traffic stops? Because we're not dedicating a lot of time and energy into ordinary day-to-day traffic enforcement to keep drivers and pedestrians safe. And I think it is building a sense of mistrust.
So, Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, I absolutely agree with you. And I agree with you so much that I will use this opportunity to say the red denotion of 2013 when we dissolved our citywide traffic unit, I'm here today to say I would absolutely support us getting resources to have a citywide traffic unit. That means more police resources. And so I would absolutely be open to that. And that may be another alternative that we just talked about today. And that may be something that the community may support too. I would absolutely be open to having a full staffed traffic unit. Yes.
And here's where this becomes so important to find a solution to the problem that the community is raising today, is that right now we are going to be very torn between, do we dedicate those resources that we know some of our constituents want, and do we feel like we're subjecting even more people to biased, unsafe searches by adding more resources? And so until we can build trust, until we can convince people that this is working well, that's going to be a very hard conversation. And it is something that, for safety reasons, we need. So whether we get to moratorium or not, whether that ends up being the solution once we dig into the data that makes sense, we need to see solutions. And we need to see ways that we can reassure people that they're not being unfairly targeted, and we need to not be defensive and not turn this into the response to a conversation like this cannot be, but there's really good policing happening at the encampment. Gosh, there was. Sergeant Snyder did an unbelievable job with that work, and the 3rd Precinct did an unbelievable job with a lot of that work. This doesn't undermine that. It's also, that's not a response to this, right? We're asking about a tactic and a set of strategies, and it's very important that this not become a defensive conversation about, are there some good things happening with MPD? Of course there are. It's got to be about, how is this working for us right now?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, absolutely agree with you. The conversation, if we are ever going to evolve and move the Minneapolis Police Department into a space where our communities truly trust us, we have to have these conversations, and they shouldn't be defensive. There's much that I can learn and educate myself on through and many of, I have. People were very passionate about this here, and so I absolutely agree with you. And I do believe there's alternatives there that we can look at, so yeah.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't mean to keep on going because I know we're past our scheduled time, but something I was curious about as we look at choices we've made in the past and the impacts that that's had is, I understand this was under different leadership, but can you tell us why did we dissolve the MPD Traffic Enforcement Unit? Was that a resource constraint, or what is it that led to the dissolving of that unit?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Palmisano, my historical knowledge of the dissolvement of the 2013 when we dissolved the traffic unit was a resource allocation. We needed more resources out of those precincts to respond to 911 calls. Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that there was a community meeting a few weeks ago, and Councilmember Fletcher attended. I believe that representatives from your department, Deputy Chief Knight, maybe, or a high-level police officer was there. Were there any solutions or discussed at that meeting from the community that you're aware of? Was there a report back from that committee, from that community meeting that listed some recommendations from the community?
Chair Cano to Council Vice President Jenkins. Deputy Chief Knight briefed me on kind of the summary of the forum. He said it was well attended, some very good, thoughtful conversations, and to Councilmember Fletcher's point about how do we build trust, that from some in our community, the traffic engagement has been something that has created trauma to some. The moratorium was brought up. I did not receive any sort of report or anything like that, but I think it was to engage in more of this conversation around the subject. So.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank all of you for being a part of this conversation in such a present way. I know that this discussion has been going on, at least internally, for a couple of months now, where the mayor's office has been really active. Your office has been really active. Certainly, council members have been engaging with this issue and connecting with residents on this topic. I will just want to share with my colleagues here that I've been digging a little bit deeper on the slide that mentioned the lack of safety for pedestrians and bicyclists as well as vehicles with the I think it's, it doesn't have a number, slide number 10. So I wanted to, one of the things that we had discussed was the reason why some of these areas, which also happen to be the most racially diverse and low-income areas of the city, tend to have higher traffic crashes. And so as these conversations continue to develop and as we dig deeper into looking at how these policing strategies connect or don't connect to our racial equity goals as well as our goals to keep our community safe, this is an area that we will need to look into more and to bring into connection and relationship to the analysis that we're bringing forward. So just at first blush, when I engaged with the Vision Zero team, they talked about how there hasn't been a direct study to figure out why is it that we have more pedestrian and vehicle and bicycle related crashes in the low-income diverse areas of our city, but that some early indicators from other countries that have done similar studies talk about the lack of proper infrastructure in those neighborhoods, such as the design of the streets and the designs of the sidewalks and so forth, as well as other things that might be connected to it, such as folks not having access to the income to purchase cars that are more safe and reliable and that might have the fully operating lights and so forth, as well as some other issues relating to broader issues around immigration, like lack of access to a driver's license, where a lot of communities of color might be impacted in that way. So that's another bucket that I think we need to make sure we keep on the radar as we continue to dive into this subject. And so this is the first time that we as an enterprise have tackled this conversation, and I think that this is good information for all of us to weigh into together, and now we can map out what are the next steps that we want to continue to do, and council members certainly are free to take a lead in that discussion, and certainly expect to see some work coming from allies here who want to advance this in different ways. We know the mayor's office has been vocal in saying that, like you just mentioned, more community engagement on this issue is needed, especially in and by and with the communities who are directly impacted. So I'm very thankful that we've had this discussion, and I do just want to add that in my ward, the questions that I get most around this kind of issue is why aren't we taking some of those cars off the street, because folks feel so overburdened with the drug activity that's going on in the neighborhood, the soliciting that's happening on women and young girls. And so I often get a lot of messages with photos of cars that people know are actively involved in criminal activity in the neighborhood, and they kind of pull their hair out at me and at the city saying, why aren't you doing enough? And so I feel like this is such a dynamic discussion, and we really do need to figure out what is the intended outcome, what is the best way to get to those outcomes, and the best way to use our resources. Certainly looking at ways to fund the traffic unit is something that we should discuss with the mayor further, just to see what does that look like in a budgetary process, what does that look like when it could be perceived by the public as an addition or a growth in the police department, which we all know is a sensitive discussion in our city right now. So with that, I want to say that we're going to continue to engage on this topic, and there's already been a few emails going back and forth about next steps. And so if there are no more questions or comments here today, we can thank our community for being here. We can thank our staff for this, and we do have another presentation item, and we're already at 12:30. So appreciate you, Chief, and thanks for being here. So without further questions here, we will move to receive and file this report from the Minneapolis Police Department on traffic enforcement data. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we will move on to item number 3, which is a presentation by the Minneapolis Police Department on public safety cameras. So if we can have the individuals who are going to be leading us through this discussion take the podium and walk us through the presentation.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Cano and council members. My name is Scott Gilreath, Commander here with the MPD, and we were invited to come give a brief presentation on our citywide public safety camera system, as well as a few other technologies, which I'll allude to here in the presentation. And just the qualifier, as we talk about this, the public safety cameras we're referring to are just that, public safety cameras, primarily the ones you see mounted on streetlights and poles throughout the city. It's not to discuss or review our body-worn cameras or our squad video, but the public safety cameras. So I just wanted to offer that clarification. So just a little bit of history for you on the public safety cameras. If you weren't familiar, we started implementing these back in 2002 in downtown Minneapolis through collaboration of the city of Minneapolis, the downtown council, as well as Target Corporation. It's kind of a pilot project, and from that point it expanded, as you're well aware, to other areas of the city in all 5 of our police precincts. Currently we have 212 fixed public safety cameras out there in the city. That includes 17 provided to us by Verizon, which I'll elaborate a little bit more in a few slides. In addition to that, we have 15 portable camera trailers, which I'm sure many of you have seen in and around. Those are very instrumental for short-term crime issues or special events where we're able to wheel one out to a particular area and put up the mast with the camera on it and instantly connect to our camera network. We've had a lot of great feedback on the camera system from the community as we kind of made the decision over the years as to where these cameras would go. A lot of those decisions were in large part due to feedback and input from the community itself as to the locations, along with certainly looking at things like crime and calls for service and general activity and traffic.
We have one question or comment from Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Deputy Chief Gilreath. I'm curious, the mobile units, are those they have the spotlights or the floodlights? Is that the camera unit that you're referring to, or?
Yeah, Chair Cano and Council Vice President Jenkins, we have, I think, 1 or 2 that have spotlights. Most of them do not operate with spotlights. They do have a mast. It says Minneapolis Police on the trailer, and they're either battery, diesel, or a combination thereof. Hybrid, we call that.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a picture of one coming up.
Oh, okay. That'll be helpful.
And here they are, the camera types that we do have. Those are primarily the 2 units. The one on top there you see, those are the ones that are fixed and mounted on street poles, either city-owned or Excel power poles throughout the city. 212 of those currently. Those are all pan-tilt zoom 360 degrees. So not only do we see one fixed, let's say, intersection, but we do have the ability to pan-tilt zoom and see what might be happening around that particular area. They're all high definition quality. And all of our cameras are either connected to one of 2 methods, either in the city's fiber optic network, primarily in the downtown neighborhood, otherwise through USIW, our citywide internet system. The portable cameras, you see a picture there as well. Again, we have 15 of those. And again, those are either diesel powered, battery powered, or a hybrid where the battery, until the battery gets low and diesel comes on to charge it up. And again, those are all connected using our citywide internet system. So the video itself and the retention period that we have, all the video that we have is always recording, and it's captured on our Milestone video management system on a city server. It's kept there for 14 days. That's a state-approved retention period that we've had since the inception of the cameras back in 2002. After that 14 period, it's automatically overwritten and deleted. So as long as we know about an incident or a crime taking place 14 days or earlier, we're able to go back and see whether or not the images, evidence of a crime might be captured on that. But after 14 days, there's no way to recover that data whatsoever. If there is a case, and oftentimes there are cases where we get a call, let's say after the fact, from an investigator who is investigating a robbery in a particular intersection, we're able to go back and check the cameras. And if it is video that relates to that particular case, we're able to take that video clip and download that onto a DVD or a thumb drive and inventory that. And then that video is kept consistent with the retention period for that case, that crime itself. So who can access and view the cameras? All the cameras are displayed at each of our police precincts, primarily on screens at the front desk, as well as our Strategic Information Center up at the Emergency Operations and Training Facility. It's public video, and it's subject to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So unless it's part of an active criminal investigation where we actually, capture some evidence of a crime, we protect that particular piece of video. But other than that, all the video that is captured is deemed public information. If there are records requests, and we occasionally do get those requests, those come through our MPD records unit, and they're able to accomplish that and release that video. Little hard to see here, but this is just a map that we just updated with all of our fixed camera locations throughout the city. You can see kind of a large section in north side of Minneapolis. Downtown has quite a few cameras. Each of the precincts really has cameras, and as you can see, they really are primarily, but not always, primarily in those major corridors. If you look at the 4th precinct, you see kind of a square around, Penn Avenue, Lowry, Broadway, and then downtown Minneapolis. Most of the major thoroughfares in downtown Minneapolis are covered, as well as if you look down in 5th and 3rd precinct, you see a lot of cameras along the Greenway, as well as on Franklin Avenue and Bloomington Avenue, and then some other areas throughout the city as well. These, again, are the fixed cameras on street poles. So just to give you some examples, because I did mention we do have and have had hundreds of different cases over the years, probably more than that, of these cameras being critical and providing us with evidence. And here's just a few examples. These are just screenshots taken from the cameras. An incident that happened, I think, a year or so ago at 4th and Hennepin, a shooting incident. On the right-hand side, you see attempted suicide on the 3rd Avenue Bridge, I believe it is, over the Mississippi River, and some officers grabbing an individual who was attempting to jump. Traffic and vehicle accidents. Here's a significant vehicle accident, vehicle versus bicyclist. And then on the right-hand side, there's a screenshot of a vehicle pursuit, in this case from the State Patrol. That vehicle crashed into that light pole there at Penn and near Broadway. That pole was teetering over, and you see the suspect there taking off and running. The other piece that we were asked to present to you is just some information on the technology that we received for Super Bowl 52 that we still have in place today. Part of that is Verizon provided us with, at the time, 20 cameras, the access cameras like you see up on the screen there. No charge to date. They put those up and installed those for us. Currently, there's 17 of those that are still active in downtown Minneapolis. 3 were removed by Verizon due to construction. They're the same camera going into the same video management system as all of our other cameras. There's literally no difference to those cameras itself. They are interested in, at some point, offering those to us at a reduced rate. That would save us some money if we chose to keep those cameras. And on the map that I showed previously, if you look at downtown Minneapolis, there's some orange dots. We delineated, the Verizon cameras in orange, so you can see the locations of those cameras, primarily along either Washington Avenue or Marquette Avenue, which were some of the major thoroughfares for day-to-day, but also during Super Bowl 52. The other technology that we procured prior to Super Bowl and still are using is something called Field Watch. There's a screenshot of it's a phone application that goes on our police officers' city cell phones, and we are able to have them log in, primarily for a special event like the Super Bowl, where we had thousands of public safety officers all over Minneapolis and other areas. And once they log in, it really is like Uber for people. Honestly, you see dots on the screen, such as you see here, and those are all either units. On the right-hand side, you see different selectors where we can turn on or turn off whatever groups are out there working on foot, and we're able to see the exact location of where those officers are as they are walking down the street and actually see the dots with those call signs or those officers moving down the street. So we at all times, from a command post perspective, had a good idea of where those officers were. And in the event that there was a significant incident that they wanted to capture, they were able to use the camera on their cell phone, and a pane would open up on the same screen that would show us exactly what they were looking at, a live feed in the command post. So if they were following a suspicious person or a suspect in a crime, they're able to provide not only their location that we can see, but also live video as they are seeing that. That's just another view of the Field Watch used on a tablet form. Then Geocom it's really a 3D interior and exterior mapping system that also integrates various sets of data. In that, we have 3D interior and exterior maps and camera views of US Bank Stadium. All of our MPD cameras are mapped out, and we're able to access all of those. The Field Watch data that you just saw, that's able to be integrated onto Geocom, as well as all of our police calls for service throughout the city, and any other data sets that we may choose to provide. That could be parade routes. We used this for the Twin Cities Marathon and drew out on this ArcGIS platform the route of the Twin Cities Marathon, so we could see where our officers were, where the calls for service were as it related to the marathon itself. There's some screenshots here that you see on the top right. That is looking at a camera shot that you see the map of downtown Minneapolis, and then there's a camera shot probably from one of the bridges over the Mississippi. If you look at the right-hand side, those are, again, kind of a 3D-ish look, ArcGIS map of downtown Minneapolis, showing locations of some of the cameras as well as location of some of the officers. And then on the bottom, that's for the X Games. They actually were able to take and recreate some of the jumps and ramps inside US Bank Stadium. And we can zoom in or zoom out and isolate certain areas of US Bank Stadium so we can see from an emergency response perspective if there was a hostile incident taking place in a part of the stadium. We, from SWAT or responding officers or paramedics, could see how the doors access, what the floor plans are, et cetera. So officers have tremendous ability to have situational awareness from a command post perspective for some of these large special events that we've had, whether it be the Final Four, marathons, certainly Super Bowl, and upcoming Final Four, and I mentioned the Super Bowl as well. And then Salamander is the last piece of technology that we really have from the Super Bowl that we implemented, and that's an ID card system. You see that ID card on the right-hand side. That's a sample of an ID card. We issued out almost 3,000 of those for Super Bowl 52 to all of our local, state, and federal law enforcement partners. And it had their picture and that barcode you see on there. And so when they would arrive for work for those major special events, they would simply take their card and scan in at our scanning station, which we had set up primarily at North Central University. And once they did so, we knew that they were on duty, and it would pre-populate to their assignment. So you see on the lower left-hand side, lists of officers. Those are officers that had checked in for the day and were on assignment, whether that was at the convention center or along Nicollet Mall at Super Bowl Live or at the stadium itself. Without that, trying to track 3,000 first responders throughout the metro is almost impossible using paper and pencil. So using that ID card system was a way to truly automate that and let us know where all those folks were. And then at the end of the day, when they checked out, we were able to have accountability to know, did that officer actually leave? Where is that officer? So kind of a safety and accountability and organizational capacity that we had for Super Bowl, and that system is in place currently as well. So with that, I went kind of quickly in the interest of time, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that any of you may have. Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. First question is, does the video that Field Watch captures, is that stored similarly for 14 days? Does that go to the same server? What happens with the footage gathered through that software?
Yeah, that is stored either for 14 or 30 days. I'd have to check, and then that is overwritten as well. And we did have some conversations with our city clerk's office about the retention period for that.
Mm-hmm. And then I actually appreciate, and I think it's a good thing that we have a 14-day retention period, and then we're getting rid of the data, but I was surprised to hear, because it's not what I had been told previously, that all data is subject to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So is it the case that, let's say you want to stalk somebody and you know that they walk up and down Washington and you want to find out which apartment building they're going into, could I request the camera footage from Washington Avenue between 4 and 9 p.m. for the 3 cameras that cover different stretches of Washington? Just as an ordinary citizen, is that a request that any of us could make?
I suppose that would be certainly possible. We are, as you know, bound by the government data practices, and really all government information, as you're well aware, is considered public unless there's a reason to keep it private. But I guess you could also stand on Washington Avenue and watch that person walk as well. But certainly you could make a request for that type of video footage, and as long as there wasn't a pending investigation or some other reason, you could get that video.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And then if nobody else has questions, I've got a couple more.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your question.
Does any of this data go through any kind of enhancement or facial recognition scanning or other kinds of software processing as a part of our processing and storage of the footage?
No, we don't have any such capabilities at all.
Okay, so having these cameras up doesn't create a searchable electronic trail of where specific people are going, because that was one of the questions I got from constituents.
You are correct, yes. The only way to search that is by manually going back and checking by time and date.
Okay, and then in relationship to the decision about purchasing the Super Bowl cameras, I noticed this didn't come to us as an action item. So what's MPD's view on, is there a decision to be made? What's the council's role in that? How are we deciding whether or not to move forward on Verizon's offer on these cameras and whether they're being kept or taken down?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I think at this point we were asked to just come and first provide information to the council on the cameras that we have, and I think the next step would be for us to have some conversations, and then if we believe that it's advantageous for us to keep those Verizon cameras, we would next come through City Council with a request for that procurement, but we're not asking for that today.
Okay, back to this committee or to Ways and Means?
I would assume both, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cano. I had a very similar facial recognition question, but that has been answered. But I'm looking at the locations of the fixed cameras that we do have, and I know you have mobile units as well, but it seems like they're highly concentrated in areas of communities of color. And just curious how those locations have been determined, what are potential plans, if any, to have cameras in other parts of the city.
Madam Chair and Council Vice President Jenkins, yes, I mean, if you were to take a look at, I guess, calls for service and crime throughout the city and look at the heat map of where that is taking place, the camera map would, in most cases, mirror that, which includes large sections of North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, and certainly downtown Minneapolis as well. But it's not just the crime, it's also where are the people, where is the traffic. So as we have made decisions over the years, I can speak very well for the 3rd Precinct, because having served as a 3rd Precinct inspector, the decisions as to where those cameras go or went in the 3rd Precinct were largely driven by the community. And in fact, the community, both Phillips and Central Neighborhood Weed and Seed funds, helped pay for some of the cameras in those areas, specifically along Bloomington Avenue, Franklin Avenue, and we have a camera right at the corner of 38th and Chicago, which has historically been a real hotspot for crime and gang activity as well. So, again, I can only speak for 3rd Precinct, but those conversations were really driven by the community, as well as backed up by the data, as I said, crime and calls for service in those particular areas.
So, do they sort of correspond with or correlate to the shot spotter technology?
Yes, I would say they're very similar, other than that downtown area there. But yes, I think the shot spotter coverage throughout the city is also in those areas where we would most likely see gunfire. Obviously, that's our first and foremost qualification. So our goal here is, in addition to capturing video evidence, is to have those cameras out as a deterrent. And I think that certainly if folks are aware that those cameras are out there, they're going to be less likely, logic would say, to commit a crime of any type, knowing that they're being potentially being watched on video.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question on the mobile cameras. And so one thing in my ward that people often want to see is having those mobile cameras stay in the neighborhoods that they've been requested in, or in the certain crime spots that they've been allocated to. And I know that when the encampment issue kind of bubbled up, there was sort of like a high demand for the cameras, and there weren't that many. And so in recent weeks and months, neighborhood residents have requested the mobile cameras in areas that are feeling distressed again. And one issue that came up was that some of the mobile cameras, or maybe all, because of the weather, they can't be out during the winter time. And so a resident just kind of said to me, "Oh, come on, we've got to have better technology than this, that that it can't withstand weather." So I was just wondering what the line of thinking was there, and if there is other kinds of equipment that are available for the mobile cameras, and if there are plans to kind of upgrade to technology that's not so susceptible to, I don't know if it would be like the temperature drops, or if it's like an issue of like fogginess on the lens, or if it's, I think some of them run on, is it oil? No.
Yeah, I can expand about that, Chair Cano.
Like
so unfortunately, those cameras are susceptible to the cold weather. They are very good spring through late fall, but this time of year, we are really limited by a few different things. Number one is, of course, the temperature last week being the worst, of course. But so for the most part, those cameras are not deployed during the winter months, those 15 cameras. There's rare exceptions to that. The other is that these are typically cameras that are put up on streets, on shoulders, and they tend to get plowed in and iced in. And once they do that, they cause significant, sometimes damage to the cameras themselves. Each one of those units is about $35,000. And so certainly we do have, you're absolutely right though, we do have a lot of requests from communities, especially our precinct commanders, who see those as a great way on a short-term basis to try to address an emerging crime pattern, whether that be a crime of violence or a property crime issue. And we try to do the best we can with the resources that we do have. We'd certainly love to have additional resources to up our fleet of cameras. There are, as I said, there's three types of cameras. The diesel, which requires somebody to go out and start that camera and fill it with diesel fuel. Those are very limited in our cold temperatures because of the diesel itself. The battery-operated cameras are simply, to put it very simply, a whole bunch of car batteries inside a metal shell. And just like our car batteries, they deplete very quickly in the cold weather. And then the hybrid is the same battery system. And when the batteries get low, the diesel is supposed to start to charge those up. But again, in the cold weather, that doesn't always happen, and then that causes damage to the diesel components of the camera itself. So we do our best to try to manage that this time of year. The fewest cameras are out currently because of the weather. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, certainly provided more context for what some of the residents are, complaining about, is that they want these cameras there to feel more safe, and they do notice a positive impact when they're deployed in certain hotspots of the city. So do we have a plan to kind of phase out kind of the more, I don't know. I mean, the only word that comes to mind is clunky. It just, all these car batteries put together and, going out there and dumping the diesel fuel. I don't know. I'm just imagining how this might work. But do we have a plan to upgrade to a system that's a little bit more consistent and perhaps even energy efficient long term for the mobile cameras?
Unfortunately, we are limited to the technology that's currently available out there, and that is the technology that we have available to us. as technology improves, I would like to hope that the reliability in cold weather would improve, and also the cost, like every piece of technology, would decrease. So we're able to up the number of cameras we have and increase the level of deployment and the ability that we do have. So this is not old technology. We just purchased a brand new camera in the last year or so. And so it continues to evolve, but we are limited to what's out there and available right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano, and thanks for this presentation. I think it allayed some people's fears about some of the things they were worried about. I think we still see some real privacy implications from these cameras, and so I just want to sort of express, as you're thinking about both these cameras, which were not generated by us proactively thinking about where's our heat map and where would we want these normally. They were sort of generated by an event. But even in general, as we're thinking about these tactics, we need to balance people's privacy and we need to balance people's ability to walk through the city without feeling like they're being constantly watched and surveilled with the sort of tactical safety benefits of technologies that we're rolling out. And so I recognize that there are places where this technology has a place. I don't want us to be technophobic in the way that we approach public safety, but I want us to, I think, probably consider privacy more seriously than perhaps we have in the past as we think about where we're going with this and what's going to happen. And appreciate you coming here to have a public discussion about it. I think it's very important that as we add new technologies or contemplate new technologies, that we continue to have public discussions so that people have a chance to weigh in and understand what's happening. And I would just express my skepticism about the purchase of the Super Bowl cameras as you're contemplating that coming back. I would need some further convincing to think that that was a good idea. Thanks.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, thank you. Assistant Chief, you have something you'd like to say, sir?
I'm Assistant Chief Mike Jose, Chair Cano, and Vice President Jenkins. I just wanted to address, you had a question about placement of cameras in certain parts of the city. When the cameras originally were installed, the first installment was downtown. It was in an area called the Safe Zone, along Hennepin, Nicollet, from Washington to 12th. Or from 2nd over to Nicollet. That was the first testing of cameras in the city, and it was to create a kind of a mapped out area that you could kind of see from one block to the next. The next expansion was Broadway Avenue on the north side, and that was to be a kind of a secondary safe zone area because Broadway has been identified for many years as the highest area of crime rates. It's a very obvious pocket. And then the expansion from then kind of fell in line with government grants, federal grants. If you look at north side, the Port Authority up there was grants tied to the port, having a port in the city, so that all the bridges that went over the Mississippi and the roads that connected to the port. So that's why Dowling is a major one, Lindale is one. It was trucking routes, and that's where, so at that time, it wasn't necessarily that we were looking for a specific area tied to crime rates or anything like that. It was, there was federal funds that were wishing to have cameras that monitored ports. And so that's what kind of kicked that off. And then the expansion from there has really been tied to citizens and complaints of crime activity, specific intersections where maybe something's taken place. And we get requests weekly around the city, people demanding to have cameras. And it's really been how far can you expand and maintain what you have? Do you have enough server space? Do you have enough internet bandwidth to get that video back? And the other expansion thing has been, do you have the infrastructure in place to put cameras? Lake Street was an obvious, there's infrastructure there. Light rail places, they installed the infrastructure. It's very much data to travel, and it's not too easy to get that data from one place to another, so that limits. And as far as cameras, we do have some that are solar powered, recharge batteries with solar. So, I mean, we're trying to go that route, but weather is very much a factor in Minnesota, and in the winter they get hit by cars and snowplows and that type of thing. So we end up having to pull them off the street.
Those initial cameras downtown, were those purchased by corporate entities located downtown? And then are we, the city, purchasing, or the MPD purchasing these sort of extended cameras, extension of the camera system?
Chair Cano and Vice President Jenkins, yes, the first expansion of cameras, or the very first cameras in the city, police public safety cameras, were a donation from the Target Corporation, paid for that installation. Eventually just handed them over to the city, and so now they are owned by the city, and they've all been replaced over time. They wear out, but yes, it does come out of budgets at this point to replace those cameras.
And then one, I guess, variable that you didn't mention was monitoring. I mean, how are we monitoring this information? Is it monitored in real time? Are police able to respond in real time, or is it just a tool for reviewing crime incidents after the fact?
Chair Cano and Vice President Jenkins. So there are 2 real monitoring stations in the city that actually try to do some sort of real-time monitoring. It's available at each of the precinct desks, or if they have a viewing station set up in the precincts, but that's only as you have staff to sit there and monitor. The 2 full-time locations where there are monitoring is the Strategic Information Center, where they've got access to all the cameras. They can hear radio calls, and so when they hear police calls coming in, they can then either pull up the camera, or they have the camera up and look for anything, and they can notify officers that are arriving or coming to the call, either on foot or by vehicle, what they're seeing. So they kind of get eyes on the ground if there's cameras. And then the other monitoring, live monitoring, is for the most part in the first precinct. They have a viewing station there where they'll, mostly in the evenings, have an officer kind of monitoring the bar crowds that are taking place, and look for vulnerable people, look for someone that may be out looking to commit a crime or something like that, and then they can notify officers that are either beat officers or squad patrols, of things they're seeing out there. And also they're listening to the radio, and they can kind of let officers have a view of what they're seeing before they arrive, or proactively look for problem locations. One of the areas downtown where there's been a significant amount of drug dealing, and that is like 8th and Hennepin is one of those locations. There's been a lot of complaints of drug dealing there. Over by Salvation Army, there's complaints, so they can kind of proactively keep those cameras up and see if there's anything going on there, and try to prevent things.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. Just to clarify, at the first precinct, my understanding was that a lot of the monitoring is done in public-private partnership, and that's still donated staff time from the downtown council or DID. So it's not always MPD making doing that monitoring work or making judgment calls about. There's at least a couple of cameras that are aimed, and they're aimable and focused and zoomable, right? So there's some amount of control as a part of the monitoring that happens out of the first precinct as well, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Chair Cano and Councilmember Fletcher, yes, that is accurate. The DID does have staff that they have a monitoring center and a dispatch center inside the first precinct, and they do monitor cameras at that location. And when their staff calls in situations, they like to pull up the camera that they can see what their staff is dealing with. That's the DID people downtown that are picking up garbage and liaisons for our city. So yes, there is monitoring that takes place, a joint monitoring with the civilian staff from DID that are there. But for the most part, what they're doing is trying to keep track of their personnel, because they have a lot of staff walking the streets downtown, and when they call out on stuff, they want to make sure that they're providing a safe environment for them.
All right, so it looks like there are no more questions on this presentation, so thank you very much. And with that, with no further business before our committee, we shall adjourn. So thank you all for being here, and thanks, council colleagues, for sticking it out.